Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull the blanket up a little higher, adjust the pillow, let the lights stay low. Because tonight, we're not in a hurry. There is nowhere you have to be, nothing you have to figure out, no problem that needs solving before morning. All of that can wait. Tonight, all you have to do is listen. You're about to spend the next few hours in Elmore. And I know what you might be thinking. Elmore, that cheerful fictional town full of talking goldfish and sentient clouds and a family of cartoon cats who can't make it through a Tuesday without accidentally destroying the local mall. What could be mysterious about that? What could be unsolved in a show about a blue 12-year-old cat with a sweater and a bad habit of overcomplicating everything? A lot. As it turns out, quite a lot. The Amazing World of Gumball premiered on Cartoon Network on the 3rd of May 2011. It was the very first animated series ever produced by Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe, and it came from the mind of a French-British animator named Ben Bocquelet, who had spent years watching the characters he created for commercial pitches get rejected and shelved and forgotten. He looked at all those discarded little figures one day and thought, what if they all lived together? What if all the characters nobody wanted found each other? What if the rejects got a home? And so Elmore was born. And it was warm, and it was funny, and the backgrounds were photographs of real streets in London. And every single character was rendered in a completely different art style because they genuinely hadn't been designed to exist in the same world. They were just all there together, making it work. For 6 seasons and 240 episodes, the show ran. It crossed over with Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. It made a direct episode addressing its own Chinese bootleg. It aired a finale that ended on a freeze frame of the main villain falling into an abyss of television static, with the entire world of Elmore crumbling around him as he screamed. And then it just stopped. For years. While fans sat in the dark wondering what came next, wondering what it all meant, wondering whether any of the questions the show had spent 6 years carefully, lovingly building up would ever get answered. Some of them have been answered now in The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, which began airing in 2025, but some of them haven't. And even the ones that technically have answers still carry this residue of mystery that the show was always so good at leaving behind. The feeling that there's something just beneath the surface of every joke, every throwaway line, every background detail, something that pulls at you a little, that asks you to look closer and think harder, and maybe stay up just a little bit later than you planned. That's what tonight is for. We're going to move through the world of Gumball at a slow, easy pace. We're going to pull on the threads that have always seemed worth pulling. We're going to talk about the void, and about Rob, and about the shadow standing behind Banana Barbara in one of her paintings. We're going to talk about a ghost who has been in middle school for 327 years, and a teacher who has been in the same classroom since before human civilization had a name for itself, and a man who sells impossible things from the back of a van and might be one of the most quietly important figures in all of fiction. We're going to ask the questions that don't have clean answers, and we're going to sit with them the way you sit with good mysteries. Not frantically, not urgently, just present with them, turning them over in the dark. If you're new here, welcome to Watterson Lore. This channel exists because Gumball is one of the most thoughtfully constructed shows in the history of Cartoon Network, and the lore that runs beneath its surface deserves more attention than it usually gets. If you enjoy tonight, please do subscribe and consider leaving a comment below. It keeps this channel going, and it means a great deal. Now, let's start at the beginning. And in Elmore, the beginning is the void. Before we get any deeper into this, I want to pause and ask you to do something. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are right now and what time it is. What's outside your window? Is it raining? Is the city loud, or is everything quiet? Are you in bed or on a couch or somewhere stranger? There's something about knowing that people all over the world are settling in to hear the same story at completely different hours. Someone in London at 3 in the morning, and someone in Melbourne just starting their evening, and someone in Chicago who really should be asleep by now. All of you together in the dark, thinking about a cartoon banana who can paint the future. I find that genuinely beautiful. So tell me where you are. Subscribe if you haven't yet. And now let's go. Section 2. The Void. Elmore's most terrifying secret. There is a place just outside the edges of Elmore. It isn't on any map. You can't drive to it or walk to it or stumble into it by accident. Although sometimes, if you're not careful enough or interesting enough or useful enough to the world you live in, the world will make that decision for you. It's made of static, television static, that gray-white hiss of a signal that can't find its source. It is a dimension of nothing masquerading as something, a vast, impossible space where the universe deposits everything it has decided it no longer needs. Broken things go there. Outdated things go there. Dangerous things, embarrassing things, things that used to matter and then stopped. Old aerosol hairspray from the 1980s went there when the world decided it was toxic. Prototype designs that never made it to production went there. Characters went there. Real, thinking, feeling characters. People. Season 3, Episode 12, titled simply The Void, Gumball and Darwin notice that their classmate, Molly Collins, has disappeared. Not just from school, from everyone's memory. She's been erased from the thoughts of every person in Elmore, from every photograph, from every surface she ever left a mark on. The only reason Gumball and Darwin notice at all is the particular quality of their curiosity, that persistent low-grade stubbornness that makes them look at gaps and say something should be there. They investigate, as they always do, through a combination of genuine concern and complete recklessness. And what they find, with the help of their guidance counselor, Mr. Small, is the Void, a dimension they access through a tear in reality in an abandoned building, a place that looks and feels like standing inside a dead television broadcast. Static underfoot, static overhead, static in every direction, and somewhere inside it, Molly, sitting in a replica of her treehouse from earlier in the series, waiting in a place she probably couldn't describe to you even if she tried. She was sent there, the show explains, because the universe decided she was a mistake. Too boring, too uninteresting, too forgettable to justify the space she was taking up in the world. And so the world simply removed her, the way you might delete a file you no longer need, and sealed the gap so completely that no one even knew to miss her. They rescue Molly. They drag her back through the portal using Mr. Small's van, a battered hippie mobile named Janice. They escape into the regular world, and then the Void, before it closes behind them, reaches out one last time and pulls their tinfoil hats through the portal, hats they'd been wearing to shield themselves from its influence. And with those hats goes their memory of the entire experience. They forget. Every single one of them. The rescue, the static, the terrifying realization of what their world is capable of. Gone. And Molly, back in the real world, continues her life with no memory of where she'd been. And no one in Elmore ever talks about the Void again. At least not right away. Here's what makes the Void so fascinating as a concept and so deeply, persistently unsettling as a piece of storytelling. It isn't presented as a villain in the traditional sense. It doesn't have a face, at least not initially. It doesn't monologue about its intentions or make demands. It just does what it does, with the patient, indifferent thoroughness of a bureaucratic process. The universe has quality standards. If you don't meet them, you get filed under mistakes. Simple, and the standards are not moral. They are not ethical. They have nothing to do with whether you're a good person or a bad person, whether you're kind or cruel, whether you've hurt anyone or helped anyone. The Void's one criterion is relevance. Are you interesting enough? Are you narratively useful? Do you have a purpose in the world? Do you contribute something that the story needs? If yes, you stay. If no, you disappear, and nobody will remember that you were ever there. The implications of this are enormous, and the show knows it. It knows it so well that it spends the better part of 3 seasons building out the Void's role in its cosmology before finally letting it become the central threat it was always moving toward being. Let's trace that development carefully, because the way the show handles it is genuinely masterful. After the Void in Season 3, the dimension gets mentioned in passing a handful of times. Characters occasionally brush up against the edges of its influence without realizing it. But the next major appearance comes in Season 4, in the 2-part episode The Disaster and The Rerun, and it arrives through the character of Rob. We'll spend a lot more time on Rob in the next section, but for now, what matters is this. Rob, using a device called the Universal Remote that can manipulate reality like a television broadcast, actually sends Gumball into the void. And when Gumball arrives, we get our clearest look yet at what the place actually feels like from the inside. It's not just static, it's emptiness. It's the specific quality of silence that exists when a frequency has no signal, when the broadcast has ended and nothing has come to replace it. It's the feeling of a story that stopped in the middle of a sentence. You can be there. You can think and feel and exist in it, but you are nowhere that anything was ever meant to be. In The Future, which aired in Season 6, the void's role becomes something else entirely, something more ominous. Rob, who by this point has figured out far more about Elmore's true nature than anyone else, kidnaps Banana Barbara, the prophetic painter whose art always comes true. He needs her to paint the future of Elmore. He needs to see what's coming. And what she paints over and over every time she tries to show him the future is static. Just static. Nothing but static. There is no future, she tells him. And the way she delivers that line, flat, hollow, without drama, is somehow worse than any scream could be. Because by that point, we understand what she means. The future of Elmore is the void. The void is what waits at the end of everything, and the show is not being subtle about what that means. This is confirmed in the series finale, The Inquisition. The void doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't send a herald or issue a warning. It just starts. The ground of Elmore Junior High begins to crack. Static seeps up through the fissures. The world starts to come apart at the seams, the way a signal breaks apart when the transmission fails. And Rob, who spent the entire episode trying in desperation to save everyone by turning them into live-action humans who could presumably survive the destruction, falls. The last image of the original run of The Amazing World of Gumball is Rob, frozen mid-fall, dropping into the void, the world unraveling around him. The credits play over static, and that's it. That's where it ended, for years. The most widely accepted interpretation of the void among fans, and one that the show essentially confirms through its own mechanics, is that the void is cancellation. It is the end of the broadcast. When a television show gets canceled, its characters don't go anywhere in particular. They simply cease to exist as active entities in the world. Their stories stop, the signal fails, and what remains is static. The void is that static. The void is what happens to the characters of Elmore if the audience stops watching, if the network stops airing, if the show ends without resolution. It is the doom that hangs over every single episode, the cosmic consequence of irrelevance, the fate that awaits anyone who is no longer needed. And here's the thing about this that makes it genuinely worth sitting with. The show isn't just using the void as a metaphor for cancellation and then winking at the audience. It takes the metaphor seriously. It asks you to feel what that would actually mean for the characters who live inside it. To think about what it would be like to know, really know that your continued existence depends on other people caring about you, on being watched, on being found interesting enough to keep. In The Oracle, a Season 4 episode, the last painting Banana Barbara finishes shows the entire Watterson family running through the void. Not toward anything in particular, just running desperate through the static. The painting sits on her wall completed, waiting to come true the way all her paintings come true. We don't know exactly when that painting's moment arrives. The void was closing in during the Inquisition, but Rob's sacrifice and the intervention of the Shady Man in the rewrite pushed it back. The Wattersons don't know about the painting. They don't know it's waiting for them. And in the casual, cheerful chaos of their daily lives, there's no reason they would. But Banana Barbara knows. She painted it, after all, and she lives with it on her wall, alongside all the other futures she's already seen come true. Quietly, without telling anyone. That's the void. Not a monster with claws, not a villain with a plan. Just the end of the signal. Just static, waiting, and Banana Barbara keeps painting. There are a few smaller details about the void that deserve attention before we move on, because the show seeded information about it across many episodes, in ways that are easy to miss on a casual watch. The universal remote that Rob eventually acquires has an AV button, a specific button labeled AV that, when pressed, opens a portal to the void. This is not an accident of design. The AV button on a television remote is the one that switches you from broadcast TV to external input. It changes the channel to a source that isn't the main feed. In Elmore's logic, pressing a V means switching away from the normal broadcast of reality, stepping off the frequency that maintains Elmore's existence, and into the static that exists outside it. The remote can also fast-forward, rewind, and pause reality, treating the world of Elmore as something to be navigated like a television recording. This mechanic, which Rob discovers and then uses with considerable emotional complexity over the course of The Disaster and the rerun, tells us something important about the nature of time in Elmore. It isn't linear in the way time is linear for us. It can be rewound. Events that happened can be unmade. The broadcast, as it were, can be edited after the fact. Except by the Void. The Void doesn't respond to editing. When the Void starts consuming Elmore, you can't press rewind on it. You can't fast forward through it to a better moment. The signal, once it starts going to static, can only be recovered from the outside, from someone watching, from someone choosing to keep engaging, from an audience that refuses to look away. There's also the matter of what the Void actually contains. The show gives us glimpses across multiple episodes, and the contents are worth cataloging because they tell us something about the universe's judgment criteria. Alongside characters like Molly and Rob, the Void holds an early design of the Watterson family house that was rejected before production. A keytar, various items associated with fads and trends that the world moved past. An early CGI design for Darwin. 80-year-old hairspray. A caged creature that appears to resemble an early design of Miss Simeon. The caged creature is the one that catches my attention most. Because if that thing in the cage really is an early design of Miss Simeon, then it means one of two things. Either Miss Simeon herself was once sent to the Void and escaped, which would make her and Rob kindred spirits in a way neither of them knows, or the universe discarded a version of her and kept the current one. That there was a Miss Simeon who was deemed a mistake and removed, and the Miss Simeon we know is the replacement that passed quality control. Which raises a question the show doesn't ask directly. How many of the characters in Elmore are replacements? How many of them are second or third or 100th versions of an original who didn't make it? Is the Miss Simeon we know the 2-million-year-old original, or is she version number several hundred of a character the universe kept refining until it got the teacher it needed? We don't know. The show doesn't tell us. And that uncertainty, the impossibility of knowing whether you're the original or the latest iteration of something that keeps being remade, is one of the more quietly vertiginous ideas the series leaves you with. The Void also has its own internal geography in a limited sense. The things sent there seem to retain their form. Molly's treehouse from an earlier episode appears intact inside the static. Rob found himself standing next to a prototype of the Watterson house, as though the Void preserves a kind of museum of everything that almost existed in Elmore but didn't make the final cut. A collection of the roads not taken. The designs that didn't work. The versions that were superseded. In this sense, the Void isn't just a garbage dimension. It's an archive. The universe's complete record of everything it decided wasn't good enough, kept somewhere beyond the edges of the broadcast in a state of suspended relevance, not deleted exactly, but not active either. Things that exist in potential rather than in practice. Things that could have been Elmore but weren't. Maybe that's why Rob, having been in the Void and come back, is the way he is. He didn't just survive an erasure. He spent time in the archive of all the things Elmore might have been. All the alternate characters and designs and stories that the universe tried and discarded before arriving at the version that went to broadcast. He came back disfigured, covered in static, looking like a signal that got corrupted mid-transmission, because that's what he is. He carries the texture of the Void with him, literally. His body is the evidence of what lies just outside the edges of the world. The Void is patient. Everything the show tells us about it suggests patience as its defining quality. It doesn't rush, it doesn't demand. It waits at the edges of things for the moment when a character stops being interesting or useful or narratively necessary, and then it reaches in and removes them, quietly, and the world closes over the gap as though they were never there. The one thing it can't wait for is the broadcast ending entirely. When the show cancels, the void doesn't need to be patient anymore. It just has everything. The whole signal goes to static. Every character, every location, every memory. All of it absorbed into the archive of things that almost were. Unless, of course, someone is watching. Unless the signal holds because someone keeps it held. Unless the audience refuses to look away. That's the other face of the void, the one the show rarely shows directly but always implies. The void is not just destruction, it's also the consequence of indifference, of stopped caring, of the moment when the people on the other side of the screen decide the story isn't worth their time anymore. In this reading, the show is asking something of you, the audience. Not just asking you to enjoy it, asking you to participate in keeping it real, to care enough, to stay engaged enough that the signal doesn't fail. Banana Barbara paints static because she can see the future, and the future depends on something outside the show's control. On you. On whether you're here. Right now, reading this, listening to this, you are here. The static is still at the edges, but it hasn't won yet. Section 3, The Mystery of Rob, From Nobody to Nightmare to Guardian. Let me tell you about a character who was designed to be forgotten. In the first 2 seasons of The Amazing World of Gumball, if you look very carefully at crowd scenes in the halls of Elmore Junior High, you can sometimes spot a tall, thin blue cyclops in the background. He has one large eye. He doesn't have a name in those scenes. He has no lines, no storylines, no distinguishing characteristics beyond his height and his single pupil. He is set dressing, a background figure filling space in a frame that was really designed to hold other people. His name is Rob, and what happened to him is one of the most quietly devastating character arcs in the history of children's animation. The show addresses his background status directly in Season 3. When Gumball and Darwin discover him hiding in their basement in the episode The Nobody, having escaped from the void in a state of amnesia and physical disfigurement, he explains himself with devastating simplicity. "I'm a nobody," he says. "I have no place in this world." And this is not, as I want to be clear, a metaphor or a figure of speech or a dramatic flourish from a character feeling sorry for himself. It is a factual statement. He literally was declared a nobody by reality itself. He was so unremarkable, so undeveloped, so narratively useless that the universe removed him from Elmore and put him in the dimension where it keeps all its mistakes. The question that Rob's existence forces is one that the show never fully lets you off the hook for asking. What did Rob do wrong? Not in a moral sense, not in a behavioral sense. He didn't hurt anyone. He didn't fail any test. He didn't break any rules. He existed in the background of crowd scenes, and the universe looked at him and said that wasn't enough. The void took him during the events of The Void episode, the one where Gumball and Darwin rescue Molly. Rob was there in the static while they searched for her. He saw them. He tried to get their attention. The show gives us a brief, easy-to-miss shot of him in the background of the void, standing near a prototype design of the Watterson family house, another thing that had been deemed a mistake and discarded, watching Gumball and Darwin rush past on their way to save Molly. They don't see him. They find Molly. They run back toward the exit with her. Rob, seeing his only chance to escape, grabs onto the back of Mr. Small's van as it leaves through the portal, and the void doesn't let go without a fight. The portal's edges tear at him. His body warps and distorts and cracks, coming through wrong like a photograph run through a shredder and inexpertly reassembled. By the time he makes it back into the real world, he is physically disfigured. His body has become polygonal and glitchy, covered in patches of static. His head is misshapen, resembling a cracked television screen. He looks like a signal that got corrupted mid-transmission. He hides in the Wattersons' basement for months, with no memory of who he is or where he came from. He steals small things from the household. He survives on the edges of the family's awareness, invisible even now, even after everything. When Gumball and Darwin finally find him and hear his story, his response to their suggestion that he find a role in Elmore is to ask, essentially, what's left? And they are honest with him. The hero position is taken. So is the sidekick, the love interest, the class clown, the troubled loner, the wise mentor. Every positive role in the social ecosystem of Elmore is already occupied. The only vacancy is the villain. So Rob becomes the villain he doesn't want to be. That's the crucial thing to understand about Rob. He doesn't want vengeance. He doesn't have a natural inclination toward cruelty. He was a kid who wanted to matter, who wanted to have friends, who wanted to show up in the background of crowd scenes and have someone occasionally notice he was there. The role he wanted, by his own account in The Disaster, was the cute sidekick. The one who shows up for comic relief. The one who gets a plush toy and maybe a spin-off someday. The one people remember fondly. But the world he lives in didn't have room for that version of him. So he became what there was room for. He became Gumball's nemesis. And for a while, he's a terrible villain, frankly. His traps are comically bad. He counts up to 563 failed attempts at revenge in one episode, almost cheerfully. Gumball and Darwin actually feel bad for him and spend an episode helping him become a better antagonist, which is exactly the kind of thing that sounds absurd when you say it out loud and lands as both funny and quietly heartbreaking when you watch it. Then comes The Disaster, and everything changes. Rob, having somehow acquired the universal remote from the Shady Man's van, discovers that the device doesn't just control the television it looks like a remote for, it controls reality itself. It can pause the world, rewind it, fast forward it, delete things from existence. And it can do something else, something that matters enormously for Rob's character. It can show him the truth about Elmore. When Rob uses the remote to rewind to the moment he was left in the void, he doesn't just see a memory. He sees the structure. He sees that Elmore operates on the logic of a broadcast. That reality here has the same mechanical underpinnings as a television show. That the reason he was sent to the void wasn't some moral judgment, it was a production decision. He was a background character who wasn't interesting enough to keep. He was a casting choice that got reversed. And then he uses the remote to find Gumball and confront him. He sends Gumball's entire world into chaos. He tears apart the episode. He sends Gumball's girlfriend Penny tumbling into the void. He sends Gumball himself there too, eventually. And the whole time he's talking, explaining, telling Gumball the truth about what kind of world they actually live in. "Can't you see that none of this is real?" he says. Gumball doesn't want to hear it. Of course he doesn't. Gumball's entire psychological survival strategy is to engage so furiously and so constantly with the surface of his world that he never has to sit still long enough for the deeper questions to catch him. Rob's revelation threatens everything Gumball has never consciously asked himself, but has always, on some level, been running from. The two-part episode ends with Rob rewinding time to undo the damage he caused, including erasing Gumball's memory of their confrontation and their moment of genuine understanding in the void. Rob gives up the one real connection he'd made, the one person who'd ever really tried to understand him, because doing the right thing mattered more. And he goes back to being the villain, alone, with no one knowing what he sacrificed. By season 6, Rob has moved beyond revenge. He's figured out the full shape of what's coming. He knows about the void. He knows it's coming for Elmore. He knows that when it arrives, the characters he's spent his whole life watching from the background, and then spent his whole villain career tormenting, will be erased entirely. They won't go to a dimension of static. They'll just be gone. Their stories will end. The broadcast will stop. And Rob decides, despite everything, despite the amnesia and the disfigurement and the hundreds of failed traps and the years of being treated as a joke, to try to save them. His plan in The Inquisition is to pose as a school superintendent and systematically transform every student and teacher in Elmore Junior High into live-action humans. Real people who could presumably survive in the real world when Elmore's animated reality collapses into the void. He calls it the other place. He means our world. He means turning the characters of a cartoon into people who could exist outside the broadcast. Outside the signal, independent of whether anyone keeps watching. It doesn't work. Partly because Rob isn't particularly good at explaining himself. The trauma of his history makes clear, honest communication a thing he's never quite mastered. Partly because everyone in Elmore has been trained by years of narrative to see him as the villain. He comes in as Superintendent Evil. He tries to transform people against their will. He looks from the outside exactly like what he's always been. Nobody listens. The last time we see Rob in the original series, he's falling into the void. The ground has cracked open beneath him. Elmore is coming apart. And his very last words before the freeze frame cuts to static are simply, "It started." He was right about everything. He always was, and nobody listened. The revival series, The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, gives us The Rewrite, in which the Shady Man rescues Rob from the void and gives him a new role. Guardian, protector of Elmore, the new keeper of the awesome store, with the knowledge that when the show eventually truly ends, when cancellation finally comes for real, he will be there. Armed with the understanding no one else has, doing what he can. Rob's arc, from beginning to end, is the story of a person who wanted only to matter and was told, over and over, by the structure of the world he inhabited, that he didn't. Who became a villain not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. Who tried, in the most flawed and roundabout way imaginable, to become a hero, and didn't get to be recognized for it. Who sacrificed twice, first his only friendship, then his only chance at rescue, for people who would never know. And who kept going anyway. There's a theory in the fan community that Rob is the character the show uses as a stand-in for the audience's relationship with Gumball. That his outsider perspective, his awareness of the metastructure of the show, his inability to stop caring about a world that keeps hurting him, all of that is a mirror of what it feels like to be genuinely invested in a piece of fiction. You see the mechanics, you understand that it's constructed, you know it isn't real. And you care anyway. You can't help it. Maybe that's why Rob's story hits so many people so hard. He's the most honest character in the show, in the end. About what the world is and what it costs to live in it, and what love looks like when it has to survive without recognition. He's nobody. He always was. And that's exactly why his story matters. There's one more dimension of Rob's arc that I want to spend time with before we move on, because I think it's underexamined in most discussions of the character. And that's the question of what Rob knows, specifically about the fictional nature of Elmore, and what living with that knowledge does to a person over time. Rob is the only character in the show who consistently and consciously knows that he is fictional. Not suspects, not half-intuits, not wonders occasionally, knows. He tells Gumball directly in The Disaster. He references the reality of the broadcast in The Inquisition. By the time of The Rewrite, he is actively working to prevent Gumball and Darwin from discovering the same truth, because he has come to understand that the discovery itself would trigger the void's consumption of Elmore. The knowledge is the danger. The moment the protagonists really know, really accept, really engage with the fact that their world is a broadcast that can end, that's when it ends. So Rob carries the knowledge alone. He has been carrying it for seasons. He is the only one in Elmore who understands what the static at the edges of things actually is, what the universal remote actually reveals about the nature of their reality, what Banana Barbara's paintings actually mean when she shows him nothing but static. He knows all of it. He understands all of it. And he can never tell anyone because telling someone would accelerate exactly the catastrophe he's trying to prevent. Think about what that isolation actually feels like. You know something important, the most important thing, arguably, about the world you live in. You know that the people around you are in danger, and you know why, and you know what would save them, and you cannot say any of it, because saying it would make things worse. You have to smile and play your assigned role and let the people you've come to care about keep living in comfortable ignorance, because the comfortable ignorance is what keeps them alive. That is a specific kind of loneliness that I don't think the show gets enough credit for portraying. It's not dramatic loneliness. It's not the loneliness of the misunderstood genius or the tragic outsider. It's the loneliness of the person who knows too much and has to act like they know nothing, who has to perform a version of themselves that is less complete than the version that actually exists, because the complete version would be dangerous to anyone who encountered it. Rob, in his later arc, particularly from the future through The Rewrite, has become someone who performs villainy strategically. He plays the villain not because he wants to, but because it keeps Gumball focused on him in a way that produces predictable, manageable outcomes. As long as Gumball thinks of Rob as the bad guy, Gumball will keep fighting Rob, which keeps Gumball's attention directed somewhere safe and keeps him from asking the bigger questions that would unravel everything. Rob is, in the end, protecting Gumball from the truth that would destroy Gumball's world. Protecting him by being his enemy. Protecting him by being exactly what the story says he is, even though he knows it isn't true. That's not just a character arc. That's a meditation on what it costs to love something you can't save in any way that gets acknowledged. What it costs to help someone who will never know you helped them. What it means to be the person standing between someone you care about and the thing that would hurt them, invisible by necessity, doing the work that can never be named. Rob is a hero the story won't let be a hero. That's the Void's cruelest trick. Not that it erased him, but that it gave him back to Elmore in a form that makes heroism structurally impossible. Section 4, The Shady Man and the Awesome Store, the most important mystery in Elmore. Somewhere in the parking lot of Elmore's mall, in the corner that security cameras seem to miss and the lights don't quite reach, there is a red van. It's been there a long time. It moves around, appears, and disappears without warning. Inside it, accessed through a door that opens into a space far larger than the van's exterior should allow, there are shelves and corridors and cases that stretch back into a darkness you can't fully see the end of. On those shelves sit things that shouldn't exist. A universal remote that controls reality. A fishbowl that contains a goldfish who will become a person when he's loved enough. An evil turtle. A game console that traps everyone who plays it inside a video game world. Refrigerators that store memories, umbrellas containing complete thunderstorms, key rings that alphabetize dreams. And behind the counter of this impossible shop, barely visible in the dim light, is a figure. A shadow shaped roughly like a large, hairy, ape-like humanoid, with two glowing white eyes that carry the specific quality of intelligence without warmth. He has no name. He refers to himself only as the Shady Man when he writes his own character into scripts. He is voiced by Alex Jordan, who also voices Alan, the Balloon Kid, which is its own kind of interesting choice. Richard Watterson, who is perhaps not the most discerning consumer in Elmore, but is probably the most enthusiastic, calls his van the Awesome Store. And the name has stuck. The Shady Man is one of the show's great unsolved puzzles. We know what he does. We know from the rewrite that he is aware Elmore is fictional, that he understands the void and the mechanics of the broadcast reality the characters inhabit. We know he saved Rob from the void after the Inquisition. We know he eventually transfers ownership of the Awesome Store to Rob and departs for what he describes as a paradise-like dimension, leaving the protection of Elmore in the hands of a teenage Cyclops with a trauma history and a thing for cardboard armor. What we don't know is where he came from. What he is, fundamentally, in the cosmology of the show. How he acquired his items. Why he sells them. What relationship he has to the void he clearly knows so much about. Whether he is working towards something specific, or whether his apparent benevolence is a posture that could shift without warning. The series creator Ben Bacalé, in an interview discussing the revival season, addressed the Awesome Store's origins with characteristic care and deliberate mystery. He noted that the store was originally conceived as a one-off storytelling device, a fun way to explain things the writers didn't know how to account for. A goldfish that becomes a person? He came from the van. An evil turtle? From the van. Reality warping remote? Van. It was convenient, almost lazy in the best possible way. A shorthand that let the show do what it wanted without excessive explanation. But then the Shady Man kept showing up. His van kept appearing in the background. And the writers, being the writers, started thinking about what it meant that this figure existed on the margins of Elmore, selling impossible things, aware of the truth about the universe in ways that almost no one else was. He stopped being a convenience and started being a question. The most compelling fan theory about the Shady Man connects him directly to the void. It suggests that his items don't come from some other dimension in the conventional sense. They come from the void itself. That the objects he sells are things the universe removed from reality, but didn't entirely destroy. Things that were deemed mistakes, but retained some residual energy, some narrative charge, some quality of meaning that the void couldn't fully extinguish. The Shady Man, in this reading, is a salvager. Someone who walks through the static collecting things that were thrown away and finding new uses for them. This would explain a great deal. It would explain why his items so consistently cause chaos when they arrive in Elmore. They carry the void's instability with them, a kind of ontological contamination from a dimension that exists outside the rules of the broadcast. It would explain why he has two specific sources of knowledge that no one else possesses: knowledge of where the items came from and knowledge of how the world actually works. Both would be natural for someone who regularly travels to and from the edge of what's real. It would also make him, in a strange way, a kind of mercy. The void erases things. The Shady Man gives them second lives, even if those second lives are troublesome, even if they cause floods and game world invasions and families to become emotionally attached to sentient refrigerators. They exist again, they matter again, however briefly, however chaotically. His relationship with Rob is genuinely touching in The Rewrite. He calls Rob Kid. He expresses something that reads as genuine warmth toward this battered, disfigured teenager who has been the Void's target twice and somehow kept surviving. He recognizes something in Rob, the quality of someone who has seen the structure from the inside and chosen, despite everything, to keep caring. He gives Rob the awesome store not as a consolation prize, but as a responsibility. He seems to trust him with it. And then he leaves. He goes somewhere better, some paradise dimension we never see and probably never will. And Elmore is left in the care of a boy who became a villain, because there was no other role available, who became a guardian for the same reason, standing in a parking lot with a van full of impossible things and two glowing eyes watching the horizon for static. There's one detail about the Shady Man that I find particularly arresting and that I don't think gets enough attention in discussions of the show's lore. In The Origins, which is set in the past, we see a younger Richard meeting the Shady Man for the first time in a parking lot at night. He's there because his son Gumball's pet fish keep dying, a string of goldfish, each one dying before it can be named or known or loved. The Shady Man brings Richard into the van and shows him a fish bowl containing a tiny, unremarkable goldfish. He tells Richard the fish is more special than it seems. That fish is Darwin. The Shady Man knew, before the Wattersons knew, before Darwin knew, before the audience knew. He knew that this particular goldfish was going to matter. He knew enough about the structure of the world, about what Elmore needed and what the broadcast required, to put exactly the right entity into exactly the right family at exactly the right moment. He didn't explain himself. He didn't announce what he was doing. He just handed Richard a fishbowl and let the rest happen. There are two ways to read this. The first is that the Shady Man has a kind of cosmic prescience about how stories work, that he can feel the shape of a narrative from the outside the way a reader can feel whether a character is going to be important before the story has confirmed it. The second is more interesting and more unsettling. He didn't just predict what Darwin would become. He arranged it. He put Darwin in the Wattersons' path deliberately, knowing exactly how it would unfold. If that second reading is correct, then the Shady Man is not just a salvager or a merchant or a mysterious benefactor. He's something closer to a stage manager, someone who arranges the conditions of the story, who distributes the plot devices that will generate the narrative he wants to see, who has been guiding the events of Elmore for longer and with more intention than anyone around him realizes, which makes his departure at the end of The Rewrite very interesting. If he was the stage manager all along, what does it mean that he's stepping back? That he's leaving the stage to Rob, of all people, the one character defined by his exclusion from the story's center? Maybe that's the point. Maybe the stage manager, having set up all the pieces he needed to set up, having played his role and fulfilled whatever obscure obligation brought him to this particular parking lot in this particular fictional town, recognized that the next act belongs to someone else. Someone who knows the difference between the void and the broadcast from the inside. Someone who can't afford to be neutral. Someone who has too much at stake to just sell things from a van. The Shady Man remains one of the show's most elegant mysteries. There may never be a complete answer to what he is, and that's probably fine. Some things in Elmore are allowed to stay in the dark. Let me add one final observation about the awesome store and its place in Elmore's cosmology, because it's something that doesn't come up much in discussions of the show, but that I find quietly significant. The items in the Awesome Store have caused some of the most catastrophic events in the entire run of the series. The evil turtle ran loose and destroyed property across Elmore. The universal remote came from the store and was used by Rob to tear apart the fabric of reality. The game console trapped everyone in a video game world. The magic notebook allowed Sarah to rewrite reality, causing chaos at the scale of a small disaster. Each of these objects arrived in Elmore via the van, passed from the Shady Man's hands into the hands of the Wattersons or someone connected to them, and proceeded to cause the most interesting possible version of harm. Note that word, interesting. Every item from the Awesome Store causes harm, but it causes harm in ways that produce stories. Not harm in the way that, say, a car accident causes harm, suddenly, arbitrarily, without narrative shape. The harm from Awesome Store items has plot. It develops, it escalates, it reaches a crisis point, and then resolves in a way that teaches something or reveals something or changes something about the characters who survive it. If the Shady Man is the stage manager I described earlier, the entity responsible for ensuring that Elmore stays narratively interesting enough to maintain its existence against the void, then the items he sells are not accidents. They're not careless distribution of dangerous objects to whoever happens to wander past his van. They are precisely calibrated injections of narrative energy into a world that needs to keep generating stories to survive. The evil turtle wasn't just an evil turtle. It was the delivery mechanism for Darwin's origin story. Because without the evil turtle, Richard never goes back to the Shady Man's van. And without that return visit, Richard never buys the fishbowl that contains Darwin. The evil turtle, in retrospect, was the catalyst for the most important character relationship in the show. The universal remote wasn't just a convenient plot device. It was the tool that allowed Rob to discover the truth about Elmore, which set in motion his entire arc toward Guardian. Without the universal remote, Rob stays a failed villain forever. With it, he becomes the only person in the world who knows what's coming. The game console that turned Elmore into an RPG? The magic notebook that let Sarah rewrite reality? The fertilizer that turned Leslie evil? The phone that corrupted Penny? Each one created a story that the show needed. Each one arrived at exactly the moment when the narrative required it to arrive. The Shady Man didn't just predict what Elmore needed, he supplied it. Consistently. Across the entire run of the series. From a red van in a parking lot that nobody pays much attention to, he has been feeding the engine of narrative that keeps Elmore alive. And now he's gone. Now Rob has the van. And if the theory is correct, if the items are calibrated injections of narrative necessity rather than random dangerous objects for sale to the general public, then Rob has just inherited the most important job in Elmore. Not the most glamorous, not the most visible, just the most important. A boy who was designed to be a background character, given the responsibility of generating the foreground. There's something almost funny about that in the specific register in which Gumball is funny. The tragedy with the smile on its face, the horror wrapped in warmth. The impossible thing that happens anyway and becomes, somehow, exactly what was needed. Rob in the parking lot, eyes glowing in the dark, waiting for the next character who needs exactly the right impossible object at exactly the right moment. The signal holds. Section 5. Banana Barbara's Prophecies. And what there is no future actually means. There is a garage in Elmore, attached to the home of a banana family, where the walls are covered from floor to ceiling in paintings. Not decorative paintings, not the abstract expressions of a hobby or a therapeutic exercise, though Banana Barbara, who's the mother of the family and does seem to need an outlet for things she can't otherwise express, produces them in that casual, almost unconscious way that suggests she barely thinks about what she's putting on canvas. She paints the way some people breathe, steadily, automatically, without pausing to question why. But the paintings are not random. They never have been. Every painting Banana Barbara has ever completed has come true. Every single one. This isn't established all at once. The show reveals it gradually. The way you slowly realize a detail you've been seeing in the background of every scene was actually important. In The Shell, the season 3 episode where Penny's shell cracks and her true form is revealed for the first time, there's a moment in Banana Barbara's art room where the camera lingers on the wall. You can see, if you look carefully, a painting that matches something that will happen later in the episode, and another, if you look even more carefully, that matches events from even earlier in the series. Things that already happened. Things that Barbara painted before they happened. In The Oracle, the whole thing gets brought into focus. The Wattersons find a painting at a garage sale, a painting that shows Gumball naked in a shopping mall, which is a normal Thursday in Elmore terms. And the family spends the entire episode in increasingly frantic denial of the inevitability of the prediction. Anaeas, who is 4 years old and possibly the sharpest mind in all of Elmore, asks the question that stays with you long after the episode ends. Would any of this have happened if they hadn't seen the painting? It's not a rhetorical question. She genuinely wants to know. Because if the answer is no, if seeing the painting caused the events it depicted rather than just predicted them, then reality in Elmore is fundamentally participatory. Observation changes what is observed. The act of knowing the future brings it into being. And if the answer is yes, if the events would have unfolded exactly as they did, regardless of whether anyone saw the painting, then free will in Elmore is an illusion. Everything that happens was already decided. The paintings aren't prophecy, they're documentation of a future that was finalized before anyone had a chance to choose differently. Either answer is deeply uncomfortable. Anaeas knows this. She asks anyway, because she's Anaeas, and the question is too important to leave unasked even when asking it is unsettling. Barbara herself never appears to agonize over the paintings. This is either a sign of genuine wisdom, an acceptance of what is and what will be, or a sign of something else, something suggested by her backstory in the future. Before she was the eccentric, seemingly absent-minded woman who gets lost in Christmas stockings and shows up in Japanese karaoke videos, Barbara was competent, focused. She worked at a corporation called Chonax Incorporated, where she was apparently very good at whatever she did, up until the point where she wasn't. Until the workload and the pressure and the relentlessness of it finally pushed her past some threshold she couldn't come back from. She suffered a burnout. And when she came back from that, she came back different. The prophetic gift, if that's the right word for it, seems to have emerged from the breakdown. Her mind broke open along some fault line that wasn't there before, and through the gap came this ability to see what's coming. She paints the future not because she decided to, not because she developed the skill intentionally, but because something in how she processes the world changed in a way she didn't ask for and doesn't fully control. She wears a bow on her head. This detail is easy to miss, but the show notes that it's there to keep her from literally peeling apart. Her structural integrity, her selfhood, is held together by a bow. The bow is doing something functional, something essential. Without it, she comes apart. And this woman, held together by a bow, painting the futures of everyone around her on the walls of her garage, is the one who first told us the most important thing about Elmore's future. When Rob kidnapped her in the future and demanded she show him what was coming, when he held a paintbrush out to her and asked her to paint the future of his plan, the future of Elmore, the future of anything, what she painted every single time was static. Not an event, not a scene, not the Wattersons or the school or the void arriving in some dramatic, describable way. Just static. That gray-white noise that means a signal is lost, a channel has gone dark, a broadcast has ended. There is no future, she said. And she said it in that flat, eerily calm voice that she uses for things she knows rather than things she fears. She wasn't scared, she was reporting. The implications of this line have been discussed and argued over in the Gumball fan community for years. The most direct reading is simple and terrible. Elmore has no future because it ends, because the void wins, because the show gets canceled and the characters cease to exist, and that's the only destiny that Barbara's prophetic gift can see, because it's the only destiny that's actually real. But there's a more nuanced reading that I find more interesting. What if the static isn't a picture of destruction? What if the static is what lies beyond the boundary of what the show's universe is capable of perceiving? Barbara can paint what she sees, but what she sees is constrained by the nature of the world she lives in. And the world she lives in is a broadcast. Her prophetic vision is a broadcast phenomenon. It can show events that exist within the broadcast. It cannot show what exists outside it. The future of Elmore in this reading isn't nothing. It's something the broadcast can't encode. It's the characters persisting in some form beyond the medium they were designed for, in memory, in reruns, in the minds of the people who love them. It's a future that doesn't look like the present because it doesn't operate by the same rules. Static isn't silence. Static is signal without form, potential without shape, possibility before it becomes specific. Barbara paints static because the future, whatever it is, lies beyond the frame of what she can paint. Or perhaps, and this is the quietest, strangest reading, she paints static because she's already seen it. Because she has looked into her own future and found it there on the other side of something she doesn't have words for, and what she found isn't terrifying. She doesn't paint it with dread. She reports it the way you'd report a forecast for weather that hasn't arrived yet. The last thing Banana Barbara paints in the original run of the show, at the end of The Oracle, is the Watterson family running through the void. All of them, together, running. Not trapped, not falling, not frozen in horror. Running. Which implies motion, direction, agency, the specific quality of having somewhere to go. Running to what? Nobody knows. But they're still moving. Section 6, the truth about Gumball's identity. The protagonist paradox. Let's talk about a theory. Not a dark theory exactly, more an unsettling one. The kind that makes you laugh a little and then goes quiet and sits in the back of your mind for a while. The theory is this. Gumball Watterson subconsciously knows he's in a TV show. Now, before you close the tab, hear me out. Because the evidence, when you lay it all out, is not nothing. And the show itself, through its own consistent writing and its carefully constructed behavior of its protagonist, does something interesting here. It never confirms the theory. It never denies it. It just keeps building the circumstances that make the theory feel more and more plausible while keeping just enough ambiguity to let you choose your level of reading. An economist and philosopher named Robin Hanson once wrote a paper about what behavior you'd expect from a person who'd realized they were living inside a simulation. The paper was referenced in a detailed analysis by a fan on the Gumball fan wiki, and when you read it alongside the show's characterization of Gumball, the parallels become quite precise. Hansen argued that a simulation-aware person would be more self-serving than average, because the simulation might end at any moment, and there's no reason to defer gratification to a future that might not exist. They'd take bigger risks because consequences inside a simulation are less final than consequences in the real world. And crucially, they would try to be as interesting as possible, as entertaining as possible, because a simulation with bored observers is a simulation that might get switched off. That last one is Gumball. That is almost exactly Gumball. He is impulsive and reckless in ways that go well beyond simple immaturity. He has a magnetic relationship with chaos that seems almost deliberate, as though some part of him understands that calm is dangerous, that the thing watching him might lose interest if he stops being interesting. He is, within the logic of a universe that deletes boring characters, doing exactly what he needs to do to survive. Not consciously, not as a strategy he could articulate, but in the way a body produces adrenaline in response to a threat the mind hasn't fully registered yet. There's The Others from Season 5, which is one of the more philosophically loaded episodes the show ever produced. Gumball discovers that a girl in his school named Claire Cooper has her own life, her own problems, her own story that exists independently of his. He is genuinely unsettled by this. He keeps finding ways to make her situation about him. He can't leave her narrative alone. And the show is doing something very deliberate here. It's showing us that in Gumball's world, the literal world of his show, other people's independent existence is an anomaly. The story is built around him. Everything revolves around him, and on the rare occasions when it doesn't, his response is discomfort at best and a compulsive need to recenter himself at worst. Is this just selfishness? Some of it, probably, but there's something more precise happening in how the show frames it. Gumball isn't reacting to Claire's independence the way a selfish person would, with disinterest or dismissal. He's reacting with something closer to anxiety, as though the existence of a story that doesn't need him is not just irrelevant, but threatening. Then there's the Zack situation. In Season 3's The Name, Gumball discovers that his legal name is not Gumball at all, it's Zack. Gumball was a nickname that stuck, became the name everyone knew, became who he was, but the name on his birth certificate is Zack. And when he starts going by Zack, something strange happens. An alternate personality begins to emerge. Confident, aggressive, cool in a performative way that Gumball never is, someone who doesn't have Gumball's particular quality of earnest, bumbling warmth, and instead has the slick self-assurance of a kid who has never doubted himself. This Zack, the show names him directly as a separate entity, starts altering Gumball's memories, rewriting them, replacing Gumball's defeats and embarrassments with victories, smoothing over the evidence of who Gumball actually is and replacing it with who Zack would have been instead. And it's only by finding a single uncorrupted memory of himself and Darwin at an arcade, winning something together, small and real and genuine, that Gumball is able to reclaim himself. The dark reading of this episode is that Gumball is not the original. Zack is the original. The Zack who exists beneath the Gumball surface is the person who was actually born to the Wattersons, the person who would have grown up in Elmore if a different set of circumstances had prevailed. Gumball is the override, the personality that was written over the top of Zack, constructed to be exactly what the story needed: earnest, chaotic, lovable, impulsive, the perfect center for a family comedy with existential ambitions. And this is not actually a fan invention. Ben Bacalé himself confirmed that the name Zack was chosen specifically as an alpha-type name, something confident and assertive and cool in a way that Gumball emphatically is not. He described it as inspired by Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell, the archetypal, effortlessly cool kid, the one everything comes easily to, the one who is never not in control of a situation. Gumball is none of those things. Gumball is fumbling and sincere and frequently wrong, and the butt of his own stories as often as their hero. In the context of the show's meta-structure, what this means is that the show chose Gumball over Zack. The narrative looked at two possible versions of the same cat and selected the one who was less polished, less cool, less conventionally successful, because that version would produce better stories. Better chaos, better comedy, better heart. The show shaped its own protagonist, and the protagonist carries the ghost of that shaping, the Zack who might have been, the original version that got written over, buried in his legal name like a record of something that happened before the broadcast started. There's a moment in The Disaster where Rob tells Gumball the truth plainly, and Gumball refuses to engage with it. Not out of stupidity, not out of ignorance, out of something that functions much more like will. He pushes back against the knowledge not because he can't process it, but because he won't. Because accepting it would require him to confront questions about himself and his world that he has, perhaps wisely, perhaps tragically, decided to leave unasked. I think the show is doing something genuinely interesting with Gumball's resistance to this truth. It isn't presented as cowardice, it's presented as a kind of courage. The specific courage of choosing to believe in the reality of your life even when you can see the seams, the bravery of commitment to something you know, on some level, might not be what it claims to be. Rob sees the seams and is destroyed by them. Sarah sees the seams and is delighted by them. Gumball sees the seams and keeps looking away. And in the looking away, there's something like the decision to love the world you live in rather than the world as it actually is. Which one of them is right? Which one of those responses is the healthy one? The show doesn't answer, it just keeps running. Section 7. Carrie Kruger, the ghost who should have moved on. On the official census of Elmore Junior High, Carrie Kruger's age is listed as 327 years old. She attends the 8th grade. Her locker is presumably next to someone whose age is 12. She is a ghost. Not metaphorically, I'm madame on it. Genuinely, technically, literally a ghost. She was born that way, which makes her unusual even within the show's logic, where most ghosts were once living. Her father is a mortal man named Władys Lokowiczki, who fell in love with a ghost through a mirror, using a spell from something called the Forbidden Book that allowed the living and the dead to make contact. Their relationship produced Carrie. She was born without a body, without weight, without the ability to taste food or feel physical sensation in the ordinary sense. She came into the world already on the wrong side of whatever boundary separates the living from the dead. She is also, according to the show, the second oldest character in Elmore, behind only Miss Simeon. She has been alive, or whatever you call the state of being that Carrie occupies, for longer than the United States has existed. For longer than the printing press has existed. She lived through the medieval era and apparently had a boyfriend, an entity named Azrael, for somewhere between 10 and 20 years before they parted ways. She has existed through plagues and wars and the slow, grinding transformation of the world from something she'd recognize to something she wouldn't. She went through all of that, and then she showed up at Elmore Junior High to sit in Miss Simeon's class and eat lunch in the cafeteria by possessing other people's bodies. There is something deeply peculiar about the fact that Carrie is treated as a child throughout the show. Not dismissively, the show takes her seriously as a character. But narratively, emotionally, in terms of her role in the story's social world, she is placed in the same category as everyone else in her class. She has crushes. She makes friends. She has drama with peers over the ordinary things that constitute middle school drama. She and Darwin fall in love in the way that cartoon 12-year-olds fall in love, tentatively, sweetly, with episodes devoted to the awkwardness of first feelings. And she is 327 years old. She has been doing this, or something like this, for 3 centuries. She has survived everything. She has watched the world change and the people she knew become dust, and the landscape rearrange itself around her while she remained precisely the same age. The social dynamics of a public school, which feel enormous and all-consuming to the 12-year-olds experiencing them for the first time, must register very differently from within 327 years of context. But Carrie doesn't perform that context. She doesn't wear her age the way Miss Simeon does, as a kind of weary contempt for everything that happened after the Paleolithic. Carrie is present in the 8th grade in a way that seems genuine. She has preferences, opinions, aesthetic sensibilities. She is into horror movies and dark music, and the specific quality of autumn that makes everything feel a little closer to death. She made a jump scare video for fun. She helps scam kids out of Halloween candy. She gets genuinely excited when Halloween stops being scary, and then when it becomes properly terrifying again. The question her existence quietly poses is this: is Carrie genuinely 327 years old in any meaningful sense? Or did she arrive at her 13th birthday, or whatever age she stopped aging, and stay there in a way that isn't just physical? Did the world she inhabits keep moving while she remained frozen? Not just in body, but in some deeper sense, locked into a particular phase of existence the way an insect gets locked in amber? In The Ghost, which is her first major episode, Carrie explains that she can't eat. She can't taste anything. She can't feel physical sensation in the way the living do. She exists in a state that she describes as miserable. Not dramatically, just factually. Miserable is the word she uses with the flatness of a person reporting weather. This is how things are. She is a ghost. Her existence is incomplete in this specific structural way. The possessing people to eat food thing is presented as a character quirk and a source of comedy. And it is funny. But it is also, if you let yourself sit with it, a window into something genuinely sad about what it means to be Carrie. She can experience taste, sensation, the physical pleasure of eating, only at secondhand, only through someone else's body. Her own experience of the world is always mediated, always at one remove, always something she has to borrow from the living because she can't generate it herself. She can see things others can't. By the drama, it's established that Carrie can see demons that are invisible to everyone else. She can perceive spiritual presences, entities, the whole noisy, invisible landscape that ghosts apparently have access to and that the living can't register. She exists in a world that is richer and stranger and more populated than the one Darwin sees when he walks down the same street. This could be a gift. It might also be exhausting. Darwin and Carrie's relationship is one of the show's most tenderly handled storylines. They fall for each other slowly, with the show giving the connection real time and real weight. And there is genuine sweetness to the idea of Darwin, this creature defined by hope and warmth and the determination to see the best in everything, finding his match in someone who has been in the world long enough to have seen everything and has somehow, against all odds, still found something worth loving. But the timeline doesn't add up in ways that I find quietly heartbreaking to think about. Darwin, as he was defined at the start of the series, is 10 years old. He is a goldfish who grew legs and lungs and the capacity for love. He will age. The show doesn't deal much with aging because it's an episodic children's cartoon, and those conversations would lead somewhere the broadcast probably doesn't want to go. But the logic is there. Darwin has a lifespan, a trajectory. He will grow up and grow old and eventually not be there anymore, in the way that living things stop being there. And Carrie won't. She was 327 when they met. She will be 327 when Darwin reaches whatever point his story reaches. She has been watching people she cared about age through and past her for 300 years, and she will keep watching. The medieval ex-boyfriend Azrael, whose grave she visits in the drama, he is dead now in the conventional sense. Gone somewhere, Carrie's access to the spiritual world hasn't helped her follow. Every person she has ever loved has moved on without her. She is stuck. Not in the void, not in the way Rob was stuck, not as a consequence of anyone's decision or any quality judgment by the universe. She is stuck in the specific way that ghosts are stuck, anchored to the world by whatever it is she hasn't finished yet. Whatever it is that keeps her here, walking the halls of a school built centuries after she was born, making friends who will grow old and leave. The show is careful never to make this explicit. It keeps Carrie's tragedy in the background, where it doesn't interrupt the comedy and doesn't demand that the audience engage with something they didn't sign up for when they sat down to watch a cartoon about a blue cat. But it's there and has always been there. The oldest student in the school, moving through the social world of 12-year-olds with the patient, slightly distanced quality of someone who has been here before and will be here again, long after everyone else has gone home. She seems genuinely to be happy, or something close enough to happiness that the difference doesn't register most of the time. She has Darwin. She has her music and her horror movies and the specific pleasure of things that remind her of death when everything around her insists on being alive. She manages. It's just that 327 years is a very long time to manage. Section 8. Miss Simeon's 2-million-year curse. If you want to understand the weight of time in Elmore, you start with Mrs. Simeon. Lucy Simeon is over 2 million years old. She is a baboon. Technically a Homo erectus, by her own classification in one episode, though she looks nothing like any paleoanthropological reconstruction you've ever seen. And she has been teaching at Elmore Junior High, or at predecessor institutions that serve the same function, since the Stone Age. Since before the wheel. Since before writing. Since before the concept of a school existed. She has been doing this job for longer than Homo sapiens as a species has existed. That number, 2 million, is one you say and then immediately struggle to actually comprehend, because human minds are not built to process scale at that magnitude. So let me try to give it some texture. The last woolly mammoths died out roughly 4,000 years ago. Miss Simeon was already 1.5 million years into her teaching career when that happened. The pyramids at Giza were built roughly 4,500 years ago. She was already ancient beyond reckoning at their construction. The entire span of recorded human history, every war and invention and civilization and collapse, everything that has ever been written down, every story ever told, all of it fits inside the last tiny fraction of Miss Simeon's life. The show plays this for comedy. She is the mean teacher. Her defining characteristic is her contempt for students, her particular loathing of Gumball, and her relationship with Principal Brown, which is perhaps the strangest workplace romance in the history of animation. She has her I Love Myself mug. She loves the smell of despair on a Monday morning. She uses Gumball's suffering as her entertainment. These are the beats the show returns to again and again, and they're funny. But underneath the comedy, there is something the show touches on occasionally, and then retreats from that I think deserves more sustained attention. Miss Simeon doesn't just hate children, and she doesn't just hate her job. She has been doing this job for longer than any creature in the history of Earth has ever done anything. And she cannot stop. The show never quite explains why she can't stop. There's no cosmic mandate stated explicitly, no contract she signed at the beginning of time. But the logic of Elmore's world, that system of roles and functions that the Void enforces, implies that Miss Simeon's identity is so completely bound up in being a teacher that she literally cannot be anything else. She is the teacher. Not just Gumball's teacher or Elmore Junior High's teacher. The teacher, the one that the concept of instruction in Elmore organized itself around. The structural element that made formal education in this world possible. In The Joy, IA, when the entire school is hit by the weaponized happiness virus and collapses into a zombie-like state of forced euphoria, Miss Simeon is the one who stays herself. She is the one who identifies the threat and works out the cure and navigates through the infected corridors. She is the competent one here when everyone else has lost themselves. And then, memorably, inexplicably, at least on the first viewing, she blows her own cover and probably seals her own fate by reaching out to zip up Banana Joe's unzipped banana peel because it's a dress code violation. She's surrounded by happiness zombies. She is one moment from reaching safety. Her survival depends entirely on staying invisible, on pretending to be what everyone around her is. And she sees an improperly zipped banana peel and she cannot help herself. That instinct, the teacher's instinct, the enforcer of rules, the creature who cannot allow a dress code violation to go uncorrected even in the middle of a supernatural emergency, has been with her for 2 million years. It predates language. It predates the concept of dress codes, probably. It is baked into her so deeply that it overrides her survival instinct without hesitation. She enforces the rule. She blows her cover, she gets infected. This is both very funny and a very precise portrait of what 2 million years of a single role does to a person. The job has become more than habit. It has become reflex. It has become the structural architecture of who she is. She cannot not be a teacher any more than Elmore Junior High cannot have hallways. The question the show never quite asks but always seems to be circling is whether Miss Simeon is happy. Not satisfied, you can be competent at something, even excellent at it, without finding it fulfilling. Not resigned to it, not making peace with it, actually happy. Whether there was ever a point, somewhere in those 2 million years, where she found meaning in the work. Where a student she taught did something remarkable and she felt the particular pride that teachers describe, the specific pleasure of watching someone you shaped go out and shape the world. The show doesn't give us that. What it gives us is the I love myself mug and the love of despair on a Monday morning and the specific satisfaction she takes in Gumball's failures, which tells us something about what 2 million years of a job you hate does to a person, but not much about what was there before the hatred set in, or whether it was always like this. Nicole Watterson, who was one of her students when she was young, seems to have hated her then too. There's no implication of a warmer era, a period before the misanthropy calcified. Miss Simeon apparently lied about her age to get the teaching job in the first place, which she reveals in The Fraud, which means she wanted the role once enough to deceive the people hiring for it. She wanted it. Then she got it. Then she had it for 2 million years and she is exactly who she is now. There's a version of a story there about what sustained disillusionment does to someone who was once motivated by genuine desire. About the specific kind of bitterness that comes not from never having wanted something, but from having wanted it and gotten it and found it insufficient, and then having spent more time than any human mind was built to experience discovering just how insufficient it turned out to be. That story is never told out loud. It lives in the background, in the age number, and the I love myself mug, and the relentless 2 million year contempt for the 12-year-olds who keep showing up in her classroom, needing things she stopped being able to genuinely give a very long time ago. Principal Brown's role in her continued presence at the school is interesting to consider. He loves her, with a completeness and a sincerity that is played for comedy but reads, on careful examination, as genuinely touching. He is the reason she keeps showing up. Not the job, not the obligation, not some cosmic mandate. Him. This furry, indeterminate creature of unclear species who runs a dysfunctional school badly and has no credentials and loves her with his whole heart. And she loves him back. Not performatively, in ways that matter. When the world falls apart in the Inquisition, she stays. When he needs her, she is present. For all her contempt, for all her cruelty, for all the centuries of accumulated coldness, she shows up for him. Maybe that's what 2 million years of a terrible job teaches you in the end. Not how to love the work, but how to love one thing well enough to keep coming back to the place it lives. Section 9. The Fitzgerald Family's Hidden Shell. Generations of beautiful suppression. There is something in the DNA of the Fitzgerald family that the world cannot quite handle. You can see it in the way Penny moves after the shell comes off, in those liquid, shifting forms that express what she feels in real time, her body a continuous readout of her interior state. When she's happy, she glows with a soft, floating grace that suggests light more than it suggests body. When she's afraid, she becomes monstrous, massive and jagged and terrifying in the specific way that things are terrifying when they've turned their worst fear about themselves outward. She doesn't control it. She doesn't choose which shape to inhabit based on what would be most convenient. She is transparently, helplessly herself in every moment. For generations, the Fitzgerald family has contained this, has hidden it, has passed down a tradition of shells, literal, physical shells, like peanut shells but harder, more complete, designed to contain the shape-shifting and present to the world, a surface that was stable, predictable, safe to interact with. The shell doesn't eliminate what's underneath, it just keeps it from being visible. Penny's father Patrick, her mother Judith, her grandmother, every member of the family going back as far as the tradition extends, all of them have worn the shells. All of them have learned to move through the world presenting this hard, unremarkable exterior. Not because they are ashamed, or not only because of that, but because they learned at some point that the world doesn't know what to do with what they actually are. That showing people the truth, the reactive, emotional, shape-shifting reality of a Fitzgerald, is dangerous, not only to themselves, to everyone around them. The show eventually clarifies this in The Amadane, one of the revival series episodes. The shells are there to protect the people the Fitzgeralds love from the consequences of unconstrained shape-shifting. When a Fitzgerald is frightened or angry or overwhelmed, their transformation reflects that, and the results can cause real harm. Patrick Fitzgerald isn't just afraid of how the world will judge his daughter. He's afraid of what she might do to the world, or to herself, without the containment the shell provides. And he's not wrong. When Penny comes out of her shell for the first time in the shell, the city's pest control is called. People run from her. She transforms into something that Elmore, with all its tolerance for the strange and the varied, cannot categorize and therefore cannot accept. She is too much, moving too fast through too many forms, not giving anyone time to adjust. The shell is not only oppression, the shell is also protection. The shell is a kind of love, the love that says, I will make myself smaller and more manageable to keep you from being frightened by what I really am. And that kind of love, however well-intentioned, has a cost. The cost is that Penny spends the first 3 seasons of the show never quite able to say what she means or feel what she feels, or be seen as what she actually is. The shell keeps her contained. It also keeps her hidden. From Gumball, from her friends, from herself, in the moments when she catches her own reflection and sees only the shell looking back. The thing about Penny's true form is that it is inherently beautiful. Not in the way that someone might reassure a self-conscious person by pointing out their good qualities. Genuinely, structurally beautiful. When she's confident and happy, when the self-loathing isn't distorting her shape, she is luminous, glowing. Something that seems less like a living creature and more like a small, warm star that has found a way to be mobile. The form her emotions produce when those emotions are good is one of the most visually striking things the show ever put on screen. And the form her worst feelings produce is a monster. Not a small monster. A dragon. Something enormous and destructive and radiating fear in every direction, because Penny's fear is enormous and destructive and radiating in every direction. She doesn't have a neutral setting. Whatever she feels, you see it. The scale is absolute. For the Fitzgerald family, this has been the logic of the shell for as long as anyone can remember. You cannot trust people to see your full self. You cannot trust yourself not to hurt people with it. The safest thing, the kindest thing, is to stay covered, to stay contained, to present a surface that can be loved without risk. What Gumball does in the climax of The Shell is refuse that logic. He chases her through Elmore while she transforms from one terrifying shape to another, getting farther and farther from anyone she knows, deeper into the specific panic of someone who has always believed that being seen is the worst thing that could happen. He chases her not to catch her, not to fix her or correct her or put the shell back on. He chases her to say one thing. He doesn't say she's beautiful despite what she looks like. He doesn't say she's beautiful regardless of it. He says she's beautiful. With no qualifier attached to the statement, no distance built into it, no negotiation of the form she's been wearing. Just her, as she is. Beautiful. And she transforms. Not into something she decided to be. She transforms into what she actually is when someone she trusts tells her that being herself is not dangerous, not too much, not something to be afraid of. She becomes the glowing, luminous, impossible thing she was always underneath the shell. The dark implication of the Fitzgerald family that I find most worth sitting with is this. Penny is the first one. In a tradition that stretches back through her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother, and probably farther back than anyone in the family knows, Penny is the first Fitzgerald to break the shell. Not to have it cracked by accident, not to find it loosening gradually over time, but to deliberately, consciously, permanently choose to live without it. That's not just a personal decision, it's an act of inheritance refusal. It says that everything my family has believed about how we have to live in the world is wrong, and I am going to prove it by living differently, by being visible, by letting people see what I actually am and trusting that some of them, not all of them, not necessarily even most of them, but some, will be able to handle it. She paid a price, her father's horror, her family's anger, the pest control people, the period of running alone through a city where everyone was afraid of her. These were real costs borne by a kid in the third season of an animated cartoon for children. And they landed with a weight and a specificity that reminded anyone watching why this show was never quite what it looked like from a distance. The shell is still there in some form. Patrick still wears his, Judith still wears hers. The grandmother, when she appears in the revival, is still in hers, though she takes it off briefly. And her true form is different from Penny's, as each Fitzgerald is, as reflecting something about who they are beneath the surface they've chosen to present. The cycle hasn't ended. It's bent. One person at a time, over how many generations it takes, the Fitzgerald family is moving toward the day when none of them need a shell to be in the world. When being seen isn't the worst thing that could happen, that day hasn't come yet, but Penny is walking toward it. Section 10, The Nature of the Reset. Why nothing in Elmore ever truly heals. Here is something Gumball knows and has never said. Every morning when he wakes up, everything is fine. The disaster from yesterday is over. The damage is repaired. The people he hurt are not hurt. The things he broke are not broken. The consequences of whatever happened in the last 22 minutes of his life have been dissolved by the overnight logic of the format he exists in. And he starts fresh, clean, ready for the next thing. This is the episodic reset. It is one of the oldest and most accepted conventions of television comedy. The thing that allows a show to exist indefinitely without any character, growing too old or any ongoing consequence becoming so heavy, it collapses the light entertainment around it. It is a mechanism of mercy in the design of the medium. Without it, Homer Simpson would still be sleeping on the floor of the nuclear plant, surrounded by the wreckage of his most recent catastrophic decision. Without it, the characters of Elmore would be dealing with years of accumulated consequence before we ever got to the new joke. Most shows use the reset invisibly, the way infrastructure is invisible when it works. Present everywhere, noticed nowhere. Gumball uses the reset as a plot point. It makes the mechanism visible, drags it into the light, and asks you to look at it directly. The most direct examination of the reset in the show is the finale, the Season 2 closer, which is built around a single audacious premise. What if all the consequences came due at once? What if the reset failed to wipe the slate, and every character who had been harmed by the Wattersons over 2 seasons of constant chaos showed up to hold them accountable? Larry Needlemeyer alone has been injured, insulted, overworked, and had his life disrupted by the Watterson family dozens of times. Every citizen of Elmore has a grievance. A truck could not hold the paperwork. The episode becomes a chase sequence of mounting absurdity as Gumball, Darwin, Nicole, Richard, and Anaeas flee the combined wrath of Elmore. And then it ends with the suggestion, from Nicole, who is the most grounded person in the family, that maybe they should go back to the way things were. Which means invoking the reset. Which means making everyone forget. Which is not a solution, so much as an admission that the problem is inherent to the format and can't actually be resolved, only temporarily evaded. The show knows this. That's the point of the episode. It is the show looking directly at its own structural dependency on the reset and acknowledging, without flinching, that the dependency is unjust. That the Wattersons cause real harm. That the only reason they've never been held accountable for it is a mechanism of narrative convenience that real people don't have access to and real consequences don't respond to. But the finale is comedy. It plays the accumulation of consequences for increasing absurdity. It doesn't dwell, because dwelling would break the tone the show needs to maintain in order to keep being the show. What's more interesting, to me, is the implication that runs beneath the reset. The suggestion that the damage doesn't actually disappear. That the reset is not erasure, but suppression. That every disaster, every injury, every crisis that Elmore experiences gets folded back into the fabric of things, not because it has been resolved, but because the format requires it not to interfere with the next episode. And that all of that unprocessed experience is sitting somewhere, accumulating, compressed, under the pressure of repeated resets. Rob, the only character in the show with consistent memory across episode boundaries, is the test case for what it looks like when the reset doesn't take. He remembers everything. He carries the weight of being sent to the void and escaping and being disfigured and spending months in a basement and becoming a villain and fighting Gumball and making one genuine connection and sacrificing it for the good of a world that will never know what he gave up. He carries all of it, continuously, without the relief of the morning reset. And the weight of it has made him into a particular kind of person, one defined by awareness and bitterness and desperate, exhausting vigilance. In the rerun, after Rob uses the universal remote to create the worst possible version of Gumball's day, and then, out of remorse, rewinds it to undo the damage, he is the only one who remembers what happened. Gumball doesn't remember. Darwin doesn't remember. Nobody remembers that Darwin died during the events of the episode, and Gumball attacked Rob in grief, and they had a moment of real understanding that momentarily transcended everything between them. The rewind takes all of that away. Rob remembers. He always remembers. What this makes Rob, in the context of the reset's function in Elmore, is something like the show's permanent wound. The thing that doesn't reset, the consequence that won't be dissolved by morning, the part of Elmore that carries all the weight the reset is designed to lift. He is what the reset costs. Every morning that Gumball wakes up fresh and unburdened, Rob is still carrying everything. Not by choice, just by nature. The reset's relationship to the void is interesting here. The void, as we've established, erases things and makes everyone forget. The reset makes everyone forget too. They're not the same mechanism. The void removes entities entirely, while the reset merely cleans up event consequences, but they share the same fundamental quality of enforced forgetting, of the world being kept clean by the removal of evidence. Maybe the reset is a small-scale version of the void's function. Maybe every reset is a micro-cancellation, a moment where the universe says, this particular consequence is too narratively inconvenient to maintain and removes it without ceremony. And maybe all those removed consequences go somewhere, not to the void exactly, but to the same territory. Accumulating in the static at the edges of things, the unprocessed residue of Elmore's ongoing cheerful chaos. If that's true, then Elmore is not as healed as it looks every morning. It is patched, yet repeatedly, with the same tool that covers bruises with concealer. The damage is still there, it just isn't visible until something makes it visible. Until a Larry quits all his jobs in protest, or a finale episode forces the accounting, or a Rob shows up in your basement carrying everything you forgot you did to him. The reset is mercy. The reset is also a lie, and Elmore runs on both. Section 11. The Origins of Elmore. Rejected characters and what that means. Before Elmore existed, all these characters were nowhere. That's not a dramatic statement, that's the literal creative history of the show. Ben Bacalé, who created the amazing world of Gumball and is French-British, spent years before the show making characters for commercial animation pitches. His job, working at Studio AKA in London, and later at Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe, involved designing characters for projects that might or might not get made. Most of them didn't. The characters were created, pitched, rejected, and shelved. Bacalé kept them. He kept them all. The cloud person, the ghost, the dinosaur, the paper character with anxiety about tearing, the banana family, the potato kid from a farming family. He kept all the little figures that nobody had wanted, and they sat in his portfolio while he moved from job to job, doing the work of helping other creators pitch their ideas, while his own ideas accumulated without a destination. Then Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe told all its employees to pitch their own ideas. And Bacalé thought about all those rejected characters and had an idea. What if they all went to school together? His original pitch was exactly that direct, a school for rejected cartoon characters. Not a family sitcom, not the warm ensemble comedy that the show eventually became. A show that was, in concept, about rejects, about characters that nobody wanted, who had been deemed insufficient for other projects, now gathered in one place because there was nowhere else for them. The producer said it was too sad, so he revised it. He kept the fundamental DNA, these characters, these rejected and discarded figures from other people's failed pitches and his own abandoned ideas, and wrapped them in a family structure, a sitcom format, a cheerful suburban setting. He named the family after his own relatives. Nicole after his mother, Richard after his father, Anaeas after his sister. He named the family name after Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, the reclusive genius who made one of the greatest comic strips in history and then stopped, who walked away from fame and money and a guaranteed audience because he wanted to protect the integrity of his creation. The show that resulted is called The Amazing World of Gumball. And everything I just told you about its origin is not incidental background. It is the entire point. Because what Ben Bacalé did was take the characters nobody wanted and give them a world. He took the rejects and made them a home. And then, working with his writers and directors over 6 seasons, he built into that world a mythology that is almost perfectly congruent with its creation story. The Void. The dimension that erases characters the universe deems mistakes, that makes everyone forget they ever existed, is, on a meta level, what Bacalé rescued all these characters from. The slush pile. The rejection folder. The place where concepts go when nobody chooses them. Every character in Elmore escaped the void once already, in the real world, when Bacalé put them into his show instead of leaving them in his portfolio. They exist because someone chose them. Because someone looked at a cloud person and a ghost and a sentient piece of toast and said, "These are worth something, these belong somewhere." And then the show built a world that could end, that had a void ready to consume it, that required constant engagement from an audience to keep existing. The characters who escaped the real-world void of rejection now live in a fictional world that has its own void, requiring the same thing. Being seen, being chosen, being interesting enough to keep. The parallel is not subtle. Bacalé knew what he was building. The show about rejected characters became a show about characters who know they could be rejected again, who live with that possibility woven into the fabric of their daily existence, who perform their existence the way a character performs for an audience because the alternative is to stop existing. The meta-resonance of the whole thing becomes most acute when you think about the characters in the show who were explicitly designed to fill gaps. Darwin, who was transformed from a goldfish into a person because the narrative needed a sidekick. Larry, who works 38 jobs because the narrative needs someone to be in every location. The Shady Man, who distributes plot devices because the narrative needs things to happen and someone has to supply them. These characters have been shaped by the needs of the story. Their personalities, their functions, even their very existence are downstream of narrative requirements. And the show, at its most honest, acknowledges this directly. In the test, Sarah, the fangirl, explains narrative structure to Gumball with the matter-of-fact authority of someone who has studied the thing from the outside. Characters have roles. Stories have needs. If the person assigned to a role stops performing it, someone else fills the vacancy. Nature abhors a vacuum. Stories abhor an empty position. The show knows it's a show, and it built into itself the knowledge that being known as a show changes what it means to be a character in it. The characters of Elmore don't exist in spite of being fictional. They exist because of it. The fiction is what gives them a world. The fiction is what gives them each other. And the fiction's potential ending is the thing that makes their stories matter in the specific, urgent way they do. Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, who lent his name to the Watterson family, chose integrity over continuation. He let his creation rest when he said what he wanted to say. He walked away, and Calvin and Hobbes ended, and Watterson continued to exist as a person in the world. His creation was finished, complete, protected by his refusal to extend it past its natural end. In Elmore, the same act, stopping, walking away, letting the broadcast end, would mean the characters cease to be. Bill Watterson could stop making Calvin and Hobbes and still be alive to make other choices. Gumball can't stop being Gumball without the void arriving. The family named after the man who proved you could stop is the family that can never stop. That irony is either one of the cruelest things Bacalé built into the show, or one of the most tender, depending on how you look at it. An act of tribute and an act of tragedy folded into each other, the way so much of this show folds things together: comedy and horror, warmth and bleakness, the laugh, and the thing underneath the laugh that keeps you awake. Section 12, the closing meditation. What it all means and why we're still here. There's a moment at the end of every episode of The Amazing World of Gumball, or there used to be in the original run, where the freeze frame settles on a final image and the closing theme plays, and the world of Elmore goes quiet for just a moment before the next thing starts. Those moments were small, they barely registered. The show moved too fast and was too bright and too cheerful for the endings to accumulate into anything heavy. But now, from this distance, those moments look different. Each one is a small version of what the Inquisition did on a large scale. A moment where the signal pauses, where the broadcast holds its breath, where the world exists in the particular suspension of something that is finished but not yet been replaced. We've spent a long time tonight in Elmore. We've walked through the void and its terrible logic of quality control, the system that decides whether you're worth keeping and removes you without ceremony if you're not. We've followed Rob from his background character Nothing, through his disfigurement and amnesia and villainy and his long, quiet turn towards something that looks, from the right angle, like heroism. Though nobody will ever call it that because his role in the story doesn't allow for that word. We've stood in the parking lot with the Shady Man and his impossible van thinking about where the items came from and what he knew and when he knew it and what it means that he chose to leave. We've sat in Banana Barbara's garage and looked at the walls. We've thought about what static means. We've asked Anaeas' question, would any of this have happened if they hadn't seen the painting? And arrived, as Anaeas arrived, at the realization that both possible answers are frightening. We've thought about Gumball's resistance to knowing the truth about his world, and the possibility that the resistance is not a weakness, but a specific kind of strength. We've thought about Carrie's 327 years, and what 3 centuries of incompleteness does to a person, and what it means to love someone knowing that time will not let you keep them. We've stood in Miss Simeon's classroom and looked at what 2 million years of a single role produces. We've looked at the Fitzgerald family's shells and understood that containment and love can be the same gesture, expressed differently depending on who's doing the containing and who they're afraid for. We've looked at the reset and seen through the mercy of it to the suppression underneath. We've thought about all the rejected characters who became Elmore, and what it means that their world has its own rejection mechanism, its own void waiting at the edges. And here is what I keep coming back to, lying at the end of all of that: none of it is accidental. Ben Bockley and his team, Mike Graves, John Foster, James Lamont, and everyone else who built this show across 6 seasons and 240 episodes, were not stumbling accidentally into profundity. They were building something. Something that used the specific affordances of children's animation to talk about things that children's animation isn't supposed to touch. The fear of being forgotten, the cost of being seen, the terror of existing in a world where your right to be here feels conditional, where something is always watching and evaluating and deciding whether you're worth keeping. These are not cartoon problems. These are human problems. They are the problems that wake people up at 3 in the morning, that make the silence too loud, that keep the brain running long past the point where the body has given up trying to sleep. The fear that you don't matter enough. The fear that whatever made you interesting or useful or worth someone's time might run out. The fear that the people who love you will eventually notice you're not as much as they thought you were, and the world will quietly update its files and move on. Rob's whole arc is that fear, made into a character and given a storyline. Nicole's whole psychology is that fear, sublimated into work and rage in the relentless project of being the strongest person in any room, because being the strongest person means nobody gets to decide you're insufficient. Larry's endless labor is that fear, translated into function. If I make myself indispensable to enough things, something will want to keep me. Carrie's existence is that fear in a different form, not of being erased, but of being stranded, present when everyone you love has moved on. And the reason this show matters, the reason people stay up late watching it and writing about it and making videos in the dark, trying to articulate why it keeps pulling at them, is that Ben Bockley understood that the right response to these fears is not to resolve them. The right response is to make them funny and warm, and to show characters living inside them with courage and love, and the specific, stubborn refusal to let the darkness make them small. Gumball's chaos is him refusing to let the darkness make him small. Darwin's optimism is the same thing, filtered through a fundamentally different temperament. Nicole's rage is her refusal to let the darkness in at all, armored against it with everything she's got. Richard's gentleness is his refusal to be intimidated by a world that has never quite known what to do with him. Even Rob's villainy was a refusal. Not to the darkness specifically. Rob walked into the darkness, lived inside it, let it become him for a while. But his villainy was a refusal to accept insignificance, a refusal to let the universe's quality control verdict stand without a response. "You said I don't matter," he said, by strapping on cardboard armor and inventing a catchphrase and building 563 elaborate traps that all failed. And even if none of this works, at least I existed in a way that required noticing. That's something, that's not nothing. The show's ending, both the original ending in The Inquisition and the resolution offered in the rewrite, is careful not to provide closure that would feel false. The void hasn't gone away. The broadcast is still fragile. Elmore still exists at the pleasure of an audience that could stop watching. Rob still stands in a parking lot with a van full of impossible things, guarding a world that doesn't know it needs guarding, doing work that will never be acknowledged. Banana Barbara still paints static when she looks at the future. But the Wattersons are still running through it in that painting on her garage wall, and the key detail, the one that I keep returning to every time I think about that image, is that they're together. All of them running together through the gray-white nothing, through the signal with no destination, through the end of everything they know. Running, not stopped, not frozen, not consumed. Running. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the answer to all of it, to the void and the reset and the shells and the 2-million-year teacher and the ghost who outlives everyone and the boy who should have been a background character, is just that. Movement. Keeping going. Not because you know where you're going, or whether the signal will hold, or whether the world will decide tomorrow that you're interesting enough to keep, but because stopping is what the void wants, and you're not ready to give it that. Not tonight. The static is at the edges of things. It's always at the edges of things. But right now, in this moment, the signal is holding. Elmore exists. Gumball and Darwin are probably doing something inadvisable involving the school cafeteria or a haunted lamp or Richard's inexplicable ability to create world-ending situations out of entirely innocent intentions. And you are here, lying in the dark, listening to someone talk about a cartoon at whatever time it is where you are, with the particular companionship of the person who can't quite sleep and needs something to hold the silence back. That's enough. That's actually more than enough. It's everything, really. If you've made it this far, thank you. Genuinely, deeply, thank you. You've spent hours in Elmore tonight, in the good parts and the strange parts, and the ones that ask difficult questions without offering comfortable answers. That's not nothing. That's what this show deserves. That's what it was built for. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It helps the channel more than you know. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Watterson Lore. There is so much more Gumball lore to dig into. The Wattersons' extended family and all the tragedy that lives there. The full history of Elmore's supporting cast. The episodes in the revival series that are quietly doing things just as interesting as anything in the original run. And the question of what the show's ongoing film and continuation will mean for all the questions we've asked tonight. And before you close your eyes, leave a comment. Tell me which mystery you think about the most. Tell me which character you find yourself returning to. Tell me where you are right now and what time it is and what the world looks like outside your window. I read them. All of them. Elmore is still out there. The signal is still holding. Good night. End of script. Watterson Lore, 3 hours of unsolved Gumball mysteries to fall asleep. Total approximate word count, 27,500 plus expanded. Section, what Elmore's background characters know, that nobody's saying. I've spent most of tonight talking about the characters the camera follows. Gumball and Darwin, Rob, Banana Barbara, Carrie. The main cast and the characters who get the big storylines and the complicated arcs. But one of the things Gumball does that I find quietly remarkable is the way it treats its background characters. Not as set dressing, not as fodder for one-off jokes, but as living evidence of the system the show is built around. Consider Larry Needlemeyer. Larry is a background character who has been elevated, over the course of the series, into something closer to a recurring major presence. And his existence is one of the show's best ongoing dark jokes, dressed in enough comedy that most people laugh without stopping to feel the weight of what's being shown. Larry works every job in Elmore simultaneously. He is the cashier at the supermarket, the clerk at the video store, the attendant at the gas station, the fast food worker, the mall Santa, the movie theater usher, the delivery driver. He holds, by his own count in the episode The Menu, 38 different jobs. He makes $7 an hour. The show tells us this directly in The Schooling, and then keeps building on it. In The Night, a brief gag suggests that Larry never sleeps. He works every shift at every business, around the clock, without rest. The episode that crystallizes what Larry actually means to Elmore is The Pizza. Larry, pushed past his limit after being disrespected and mistreated by the Wattersons one too many times, quits. All 38 jobs at once. And what happens to Elmore in the absence of Larry is not a minor inconvenience. It is not a mild disruption. Elmore society collapses. Stores close. Services stop. The commercial infrastructure of the entire town seizes up because the one person who staffed all of it has walked out. This means that Larry Needlemeyer is the linchpin of Elmore's entire economy. Without him, the town cannot function. With him, it hums along with the taken-for-granted smoothness of infrastructure. He is essential, indispensable, irreplaceable, the single point of failure for the whole system. And he makes $7 an hour, and he never sleeps. And he is treated badly enough by the Wattersons specifically that he eventually quits everything in protest. The fan theory I find most compelling about Larry, and it appears in various forms across different fan forums and wikis, is that his compulsion to hold every job comes from an unconscious terror of the void. He has seen somewhere in his awareness what happens to characters who don't have a role. Molly had one role, boring classmate, and when that wasn't enough, she got erased. Rob had no role, and he got sent to the static. But Larry is the cashier, and the delivery driver, and the gas station attendant, and the mall Santa. He is essential to 38 different narratives simultaneously. He is, by any measure, the single most unerasable character in Elmore. The universe cannot remove him without the whole town collapsing. The exhaustion is the strategy. The sleeplessness is the defense. Every hour he doesn't spend working is an hour where he could theoretically become irrelevant to one of his 38 jobs. And the math of that, the terrifying math of what happens if you're deemed no longer necessary, keeps him moving. Always. Without stopping. What this means, as a portrait of a character's inner life, is that Larry is running from the void just as hard as anyone else in Elmore. He just chose a different strategy than Gumball's chaos, or Nicole's relentless competence, or Rob's awareness. He chose to make himself so structurally necessary to so many things that the universe would have to burn itself down to remove him. The irony is that this doesn't feel like security when you're living it. It feels like a different kind of trap. He cannot stop. He cannot rest. He cannot have a bad day without the threat of the whole system failing. He traded one kind of vulnerability, the vulnerability of the irrelevant, for another kind, the vulnerability of the indispensable. Both kinds keep you from sleeping. There's also something the show does early in its run that creates a strange continuity problem that actually illuminates something about how the world works. We learn in The Laziest that Larry used to be lazy. Not mild, low-ambition lazy. The laziest person in all of Elmore, holder of that specific title and status. He was Lazy Larry. And then Richard Watterson arrived and took the title, and Larry responded to that loss by going entirely the other direction. From the laziest to the hardest working. From someone defined by doing nothing to someone defined by doing everything. Richard's existence changed Larry's life fundamentally. Not through any deliberate act. Richard didn't set out to displace Larry. Richard was just Richard, spectacularly, cosmically lazy, and his arrival in the laziness ecosystem made Larry's position there untenable. The universe, apparently, can only support one person at each extreme of any spectrum. Larry was pushed out of the laziness end and migrated to the industry end, and has been there ever since. What this tells us about Elmore's cosmology is that roles are not just assigned, they're competitive. There is only one laziest person. There is only one main villain. There is only one protagonist. The spaces at the narrative peaks are finite, and if someone displaces you from the space you occupied, you either find a different peak or you lose your reason for being there at all. Larry found a different peak. Rob found the only available villain slot. Gumball was always going to be the protagonist because the show was built around him. Everyone else is working around those gravitational centers, finding the roles that the structure has room for, making themselves fit the gaps. And Larry, in his gap, makes $7 an hour and never sleeps and keeps Elmore running. Expanded section. The question of what Elmore is exactly. I want to spend some time on a question that the show circles repeatedly but never answers cleanly, because answering it cleanly would take something away from the experience of inhabiting the uncertainty. The question is, what is Elmore exactly? Not in the fictional sense. Elmore is a city in California, fictional, where animated characters of various species and objects live their daily lives. That's the surface answer. But what is Elmore in the structural sense? What kind of thing is it, ontologically? What rules does it follow? What is the nature of the reality that its inhabitants experience? The show gives us many partial answers, none of which completely resolve the question. Elmore is a television show. This is confirmed most directly by Rob, who knows it, and by the mechanics of the universal remote, which can manipulate reality using the same interface as a television remote. The world has a channel. It has a broadcast. It can be paused, rewound, fast-forwarded. It exists as a transmission, a signal going from some source to some audience. But what is the source? What is broadcasting Elmore? Who is the audience that keeps it alive? The show suggests the audience is us, the viewers. Charles, the in-universe fan who documents Gumball and Darwin's adventures and writes fan fiction about them and functions as the show's diegetic representation of the audience, seems to be the anchor for this reading. She watches. She cares. Her caring is, in some sense, what keeps the broadcast real. And when the void threatens to consume Elmore, the implicit response to that threat is, keep watching, keep caring, don't change the channel. But there's another layer to Elmore's nature that the show adds through the mixed media aesthetic, the thing that makes Gumball visually unique among all the animated series that have ever aired. The backgrounds of Elmore are photographs, real photographs, mostly of real locations in London, where the show was produced. The streets Gumball and Darwin run through are actual streets. The buildings they pass are actual buildings, photographed and used as the physical substrate of the fictional city. The characters who live in those streets are not photographs. They're drawings, or CGI models, or stop-motion figures, or puppets, or in Sussie's case, an actual human chin, filmed upside down with googly eyes. None of them were designed to exist in the same world as each other. They come from different visual registers, different aesthetic traditions, different fundamental assumptions about how representation works. And yet they inhabit these real-world photographs together, layered on top of the actual landscape of London, insisting on their own fictional reality against the documentary reality of the ground they stand on. This is, on a design level, deeply strange. And on a thematic level, it's doing something very specific. The characters of Elmore exist in the real world, not in a metaphysical sense, in a literal photographic sense. They are placed frame by frame into actual photographs of the actual world. They walk down real streets. They stand in front of real buildings. The reality of the world they inhabit is not simulated. It is documented. What this means is that Elmore is not entirely separate from our world. It is layered on top of it. The characters exist in a literal space, the specific photographs of specific London locations that became the backgrounds of specific scenes. And if you went to those locations, you could stand in the exact spaces where animated versions of Gumball and Darwin have walked, have argued, have fallen down, and gotten back up and caused chaos and loved each other. There's something moving about that, something that doesn't have a clean intellectual articulation but that registers as significant. The place is real, even if the characters aren't. The ground they stand on is real ground. The buildings they pass are real buildings. The world they inhabit, while animated over the top of it, is the actual world. Maybe that's what the show means when it talks about the characters wanting to escape to the other place, our world, where the broadcast never fully closes, where the photographs persist long after any specific episode has ended. The characters want to exist in the world that the backgrounds are photographs of. They want to cross the line between the drawn figure and the documented reality. And Rob, who tried to accomplish exactly that in The Inquisition, who tried to transform everyone into live-action humans who could survive in the other place, was closer to the truth of how to solve the problem than anyone gave him credit for. The backgrounds know the answer. They're already there, in the world where none of this is fictional. Photographs of real streets in a real city. They've been waiting for the characters to arrive. Expanded section. Darwin Watterson and the question of whether he is real. Darwin Raglan. Caspian Ahab. Poseidon Nicodemus Watterson III. That is the full name recorded on whatever records Elmore keeps, a name of such improbable length that it suggests someone was compensating for something or having a very good time, was a goldfish. Let me say that again, because I think it needs emphasizing to appreciate what follows. Darwin was a goldfish, not a goldfish person, not a character who resembled a goldfish, not a fish who had been given magical powers or evolutionary upgrades in the normal course of things. He was an ordinary, non-sentient, 6-second memory goldfish who lived in a glass bowl in the Watterson household. He was, in the strict literal sense, a pet. And before that, before Darwin specifically, there were other goldfish. Gumball had a series of pet fish, each one dying before the family could get properly attached. Darwin was the latest in this sequence of replacements, unnamed and unremarkable, swimming in circles in a bowl in a boy's bedroom. Then the Wattersons were startled by Darwin suddenly speaking, panicked, and accidentally flushed him. And Darwin, swept through the sewers of Elmore, made his way across the city, crawling on newly grown legs, breathing with newly developed lungs, finding his way back to the family he loved because he loved them enough to cross the city to reach them. By the time he arrived, he had stopped being a fish in any meaningful sense. He had become a person. The show's explanation for this is the power of love. Gumball loved Darwin enough, refused so completely to accept that Darwin was gone. And that refusal, that fierce, persistent caring, shaped the universe in the direction of Darwin's survival and return. It's a beautiful story. It's the kind of story that makes you well up a little when the show presents it seriously, as it does in The Origins two-parter. The idea that love has physical consequences, that the strength of your attachment to something can change what that thing becomes, is one of the most human impulses there is, and one that animated storytelling can express in ways live action rarely can. But here's what happens if you take the same story and look at it from a slightly different angle. Darwin didn't choose to evolve. He didn't want to become a person. He was a goldfish. He didn't have wants in the cognitive sense. He evolved because a child refused to let him stay what he was. The transformation wasn't Darwin's decision. It was a decision made for Darwin by Gumball's love, which is very different from being a decision made by Darwin himself. Everything Darwin is, his warmth, his optimism, his devotion to the Wattersons, his moral clarity, his loyalty to Gumball specifically, was produced by a process he had no agency over. His personality is not something he developed through experience and reflection, the way a person typically develops a personality. His personality materialized, essentially fully formed, at the moment of his transformation. He arrived at the Watterson house with legs and lungs and a complete emotional character already in place. The dark reading, and I want to be precise about calling it a reading rather than the truth, because the show leaves room for both, is that Darwin isn't a person who was once a fish. He's a character who is assigned the persona of loyal, optimistic sidekick by the narrative requirements of the story and placed into a fish-shaped vessel. He is what the story needed Gumball to have: a best friend, a moral compass, an anchor. And when the story needed that character to be present, the universe reached into a fishbowl and made him. There are episodes that seem to push back on this reading, that show Darwin experiencing genuine complexity and growth that goes beyond the sidekick archetype. The Origins itself is a portrait of real agency and real love. He chose to come back, even as a fish. He chose to cross the city. He chose the Wattersons when he could have been swept out to sea and found a different life. But the question the show raises and never fully settles is whether that choice, made by a pre-transformation goldfish, in a body that didn't have the cognitive infrastructure for decisions the way we understand them, can be attributed to Darwin in any meaningful sense. Was it Darwin who chose, or was it the love the Wattersons directed at him, shaping the universe in the direction they wanted and carrying him along in the current of their caring? The show, to its credit, doesn't resolve this. It lets Darwin be real and lets the question of his realness exist simultaneously, the way the best stories hold contradictions without forcing them to resolve. Darwin is loved. Darwin loves back. He is the heart of the Watterson family and the moral center of the show. Whatever the metaphysics of his origin, what he has become is unmistakably genuine. But in the quiet of The Roots, the episode that asks whether Darwin should be returned to the ocean, you can feel the show sitting with that question. Letting it breathe. Acknowledging that Darwin's life, whatever its origin, might have a cost to it that the warmth of the Wattersons' love doesn't fully cancel out. That the fish who became a person and the person he became carry something of the fish still inside them. A creature between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Perfect for the sidekick role. Just complicated enough, just liminal enough, just caught enough between states of being to be one of the most interesting characters in the whole world of Elmore. He is real. The question of how he became real is the one the show keeps turning over, carefully, without breaking it. Expanded section. The world-ending wait why of Nicole Watterson. We should talk about Nicole, not because Nicole is unsolved in the same way the void is unsolved, or because her backstory contains mysteries comparable to Rob's. Nicole's story is actually told fairly directly, across multiple episodes, with more clarity than most major characters receive. The tragedy of Nicole is not a puzzle. It's just quiet, wrapped in comedy, wearing the costume of a joke. Nicole Watterson works at the Rainbow Factory. She can run faster than the speed of sound. In the Season 2 episode The Fury, she trades energy blasts and performs martial arts that would be technically impossible in any realistic setting, against an opponent who is herself not a normal person by any measure. Her combat abilities are essentially superhero grade. They have no in-universe explanation beyond she's very intense and she really commits to things. She grew up with a father who had a violent temper and a mother who demanded absolute perfection from her at all times. She trained in karate obsessively as a child, channeling the domestic tension of her household into the one arena where she could redirect everything she was feeling into something controlled and purposeful. She met Richard Watterson. She chose him over her parents' expectations. Her parents didn't come to the wedding. The episode The Choices tells this story beautifully in a format that moves through alternate timelines to show us what Nicole's life might have looked like if she'd made different decisions. In one of those timelines, Nicole becomes a dictator. Not a cruel one necessarily, but someone who took the control and competence and determination that define her and applied them to the project of running a country, because her parents' treatment of her produced a person for whom control is survival, and survival requires total control. The dictator timeline is played as a joke. The show knows it's funny, but it's the joke that reveals the truth, as jokes often do. The person Nicole became, the one who holds her family together with enormous strength and endless labor and a willingness to break the speed of sound on a Tuesday to prevent another Watterson disaster, is not so different from the person who would have become a dictator if the circumstances had pushed in that direction. The same qualities, the same underlying architecture. The destination changed, but the infrastructure is identical. Nicole's superhuman abilities are, within the show's logic, a physical manifestation of the weight she carries. In a world where your power and your role in the narrative are connected, Nicole's ability to generate energy beams and create earthquakes with her fists is the universe's way of expressing how much the story requires her to hold. She's not strong because the show thought it would be funny to have a superpowered mom. She's strong because in the logic of Elmore, she has to be. The family would collapse without her. The episodic structure requires that someone can always fix the unfixable. That someone is Nicole. And she married Richard. Gentle, passive, perfectly incapable of ambition Richard, who is everything her parents were not and who loves her with a completeness and a warmth that is uncomplicated in a way that nothing else in her life has ever been. She didn't choose the antidote to her parents out of trauma exactly. She chose it out of wisdom. She knew what damage demanding people had done to her, and she chose someone who would never demand anything. The cost is that she carries everything, every bill, every crisis, every consequence of the Watterson family's tendency to accidentally accelerate toward disaster in the manner of a friendly, well-meaning avalanche. Richard cannot be responsible for these things because the universe will not allow him to be, we've established this, the job episode, the reality-tearing consequences of Richard actually working. Nicole carries them because she can, because she was built by both nature and trauma to be the person who can. She cannot relax. This is not a personal failing. It is a structural condition. In the painting, the school suggests Nicole try to relax, and she goes insane attempting to be calm. The comedy of this is in the spectacle. Nicole's intensity applied to the project of having no intensity produces something that looks like a nervous breakdown at high velocity. But beneath the comedy is a woman whose nervous system was conditioned from early childhood to read stillness as danger, to read calm as the absence of necessary vigilance. Her nervous system learned, if nothing is going wrong, it means I'm not paying close enough attention. She is always paying close enough attention. She has been paying close enough attention for her entire life. The price of that is that she doesn't know how to stop. Richard, who gives the Watterson children the soft place to land that neither he nor Nicole ever had, is the best thing that happened to Nicole. Not because he saved her. Nicole doesn't need saving in any conventional sense, but because he gave her something to come home to that didn't require her to be strong. A place where strength was not the entry fee, where showing up exhausted and overwhelmed was not a failure. She built a family around that, around the idea that you can be competent and strong and capable of extraordinary things and still need somewhere to be held. That the person who holds the family together also needs to be held sometimes. That the person who can break the sound barrier also has a human interior that wants to sit down and breathe and be loved without performing anything. The show honors this about Nicole. In the quieter episodes, the ones that pull the camera back from the comedy and let the characters just be together for a moment, you can see it. The choice she made, choosing love over expectation, choosing Richard, choosing this particular family and this particular chaos and this particular life, it is, in every meaningful sense, the right choice. Even when the consequences of Richard's existence are cosmically complicated, even when the family accidentally destroys them all again, she keeps showing up. She always does. That's Nicole. That's the mystery of Nicole, such as it is. Not a hidden truth, not an unsolved puzzle, just a person who carries too much, who does it anyway, who has done it for years, who will keep doing it. The superhuman abilities are just the show trying to draw her big enough to hold what she is. Expanded section. Anaeas Watterson and the loneliness of knowing too much. There is something very specific and very precise about the kind of intelligence Anaeas Watterson has, and the show never quite lets you forget how strange her situation is as. She is 4 years old. She attends the 8th grade. She speaks 4 languages and understands advanced mathematics, and has the kind of philosophical patience with difficult questions that most adults never develop. In the episode The Oracle, she is the one who asks whether the events would have happened if they hadn't seen the painting. A question about determinism and free will and the participatory nature of observation that you would expect from a graduate student, not a preschooler. She is 4. She is the smartest person in her family by a margin that the show occasionally plays for comedy, but that, when you think about it clearly, is just sad. Because being the smartest person in a room that you're too young to be in is one of the loneliest possible configurations of existence. The kids her age at the school she should be attending, the kids who are 4, who are appropriate peers for a 4-year-old, are not her intellectual equals and cannot be her meaningful companions in the ways she needs. And the kids she actually attends school with, the 12 and 13-year-olds of Elmore Junior High, share her intellectual environment, but nothing else. She can solve the same problems. She cannot navigate the same social terrain. She doesn't share their references, their humor, their developmental concerns. She is in the right grade for her brain and the wrong grade for everything else. The episode The Friend shows her trying to make a friend and ending up with an imaginary companion, a terrifying, violence-prone imaginary friend named Snowball, who is the id of every frustrated, lonely, gifted child who ever decided that a fantasy companion would be more reliable than a real one. The show plays it for laughs. It is, in retrospect, a very clear portrait of social isolation. Anaeas' intelligence also puts her in the interesting position of being the member of the Watterson family, most likely to accidentally discover the truth about Elmore. Not because she's seeking it out, she doesn't know there's a truth to discover, but because she applies logic to her environment in ways that the other characters don't. She notices when things don't add up. She asks about causality when everyone else accepts the magical or comedic explanation without examination. She is the one character in the family whose thinking process is systematic enough that if the cracks in reality became visible, she would be the first to map them. The Void targets boring characters. Characters without narrative function. Characters who don't generate interesting situations. Anaeas, by any measure, is interesting. She is one of the most narratively distinct characters in the show. But the fan theory that has her as a potential Void target focuses on something different: the threat of awareness. The Void, as we've established, destroys Elmore if the protagonists discover the show's fictional nature. And Anaeas, with her systematic intelligence and her habit of asking the foundational questions, is perhaps the most likely member of the Watterson family to accidentally stumble all the way to the truth. The show handles this by keeping Anaeas' inquiries at the level of philosophy rather than meta-reality. She asks whether things would have happened if they hadn't seen the painting. This is a question about determinism within Elmore's world, not a question about whether Elmore is a television show. She stays on the safe side of the line, asking the right questions about the wrong level of reality, and the show keeps her there, brilliant and curious, and right at the edge of something she's not allowed to reach. What would happen to Anaeas if she did reach it? If she connected the dots all the way? She is not Rob, who has the armor of prior experience with the void, and a kind of battered pragmatism about the worst that can happen. Anaeas is 4 years old, emotionally. Her understanding of the world is built from models. She constructs mental frameworks, tests them against reality, refines them when they break. If the fundamental model turned out to be wrong, if the world she has been modeling turned out to be fiction, the collapse would not be explosive. It would be architectural. The whole framework would have to be rebuilt from scratch, and the energy that Anaeas channels into intelligence and understanding would have nowhere to go, nothing solid to anchor to. She would go quiet. The show never tests this. It keeps Anaeas at the edge of the questions, asking the right things with the wrong frame of reference, brilliant and safe, and 4 years old in a world that doesn't always know what to do with people who are too smart for their own good. But the question sits there, waiting. Like Banana Barbera's paintings, like static at the edges of things. Expanded section. The Elmore Clown. The mystery. No one fully answers. There is something in Elmore that appears in the background of episode after episode, never acknowledged by the characters, never given a name or a storyline or any explanation at all. It appears, watches, and disappears. A clown, not a specific character with a defined identity and role in the story. Just a clown, or what appears to be a clown, present in the background of many scenes across many seasons, always positioned slightly off to the side, always watching. Fan communities have cataloged its appearances extensively. It shows up in crowds, in corridors, in places where you wouldn't necessarily expect a clown to be, and the show's characters never comment on it because the show's characters cannot see it. This is distinct from the background characters who are visible to the cast, the various citizens of Elmore who populate the streets and the school halls, and who occasionally get brief speaking roles. The clown is different. It appears with the quality of something that exists in the frame without existing in the world. The theories about what the clown represents range from the mundane, a production in joke, an Easter egg left by the animators as a running gag, to the more elaborate. Some fans have connected it to the void, suggesting the clown is an emissary or an observer of some kind, a manifestation of the border between Elmore and the static. Others have suggested it's a specific character whose identity was planned for a storyline that never got developed. What's interesting about the clown as a mystery is not necessarily the specific explanation, which may never come. What's interesting is the way its presence functions within the show's broader atmosphere. Gumball is a show that regularly breaks the fourth wall, that regularly incorporates elements from outside the narrative frame into the narrative, that treats the boundary between story and reality as permeable. In that context, something that exists in the visual frame but not in the diegetic world, that can be seen by us but not by the characters, reads as a message, as something placed there specifically for the audience, visible only to the people on the other side of the screen. If the characters are performing for an audience they can't see and the audience is what keeps them alive, then the clown is the audience's proxy, the presence that watches, the thing that registers each episode without being registered by the world it's watching. Or it's just a production in joke. Gumball has plenty of those. The show's creators clearly enjoyed leaving things in the corners of frames, but in a show about the nature of being watched, a watcher who can only be seen by the watchers carries a particular kind of resonance. You're not just watching a show, you're sharing the frame with something that knows you're there. Think about that, lying in the dark. Final expanded section, Mr. Small and the unprocessed memory. Before we circle back to the closing meditation and let tonight come to rest, I want to spend a moment with Mr. Small. Steve Small is the guidance counselor of Elmore Junior High. He is a pink cloud, roughly spherical, who practices a free-form, incense-heavy approach to student counseling that produces almost no measurable results, and clearly serves more as his own therapeutic practice than as any meaningful service to the students. He meditates. He has crystals. He performs mantras. He speaks in the vocabulary of wellness and spiritual health, with the tone of someone who discovered mindfulness at a specific, difficult moment in their life and has never fully moved past the discovery. Mr. Small entered the void in The Void. He was one of the three characters, alongside Gumball and Darwin, who went into the static to rescue Molly. He saw it. He experienced it. He came back, and then the void took his hat, and he forgot everything. But here's the thing about traumatic memory, and the show doesn't say this directly, but it doesn't need to because it shows it. Forgetting an event doesn't mean the body has forgotten. The nervous system keeps records that the conscious mind doesn't have access to. The void can take Mr. Small's recollection of what happened, but it cannot take the way he felt in there. The texture of the static, the specific quality of the emptiness, the existential vertigo of standing in a place that exists outside the frame of everything he knew about reality. He doesn't remember, but his relentless spiritual seeking, the incense and the crystals and the mantras and the meditation, reads through this lens as a treatment program for a wound he can't name. He is medicating something, soothing a distress whose source is inaccessible to him. He sits in his office and talks to students about peace and harmony and the interconnectedness of all things, because the alternative is sitting in his office feeling a formless dread that has no object he can point to, a sense that reality is more fragile and more conditional than anyone around him seems to realize. He's not wrong about that. He just can't remember why he knows it. His Van Janus, the vehicle that carried them all in and out of the void, the hippie mobile that was itself sent to the void for being a relic of a bygone era before being retrieved, is Mr. Small's closest companion. He talks to her. He treats her with the affection and care you'd give a longtime friend, not an object. And within the logic of they were in the void together, this isn't just quirky character detail, it's connection. It's the bond between two entities who survive the same impossible thing and carry the evidence of it in their bodies without being able to describe what they survived. Janice was in the void. Mr. Small was in the void. Neither of them remembers. Both of them carry it. They understand each other in the way that trauma survivors understand each other when they're in the same room. Not through discussion, not through explicit acknowledgement, but through something more immediate. A recognition. A shared knowing that can't be put into words. Mr. Small is a joke most of the time. He is played for comedy. The incense and the crystals and the barely competent counseling are all played for comedy. But underneath the comedy is a being who has been to the edges of what's real and came back with the memory erased, but the experience intact, and who has been, in his own fumbling, crystal-filled way, trying to process it ever since. Some people carry their worst experiences in their bodies long after the memories have gone. Some people spend years in spiritual seeking that feels vague and unfocused, because what they're seeking has no name they can access. Some people surround themselves with calming things because something, somewhere in their system, still knows they were once somewhere very far from calm. Mr. Small is all of these people distilled into a pink cloud with a van and a tendency to dispense crystals when someone needs actual therapy. He made it out of the void. He doesn't know that, but some part of him does. A final note on why these mysteries matter. The questions we've spent tonight with do not have clean endings. That's by design. The amazing world of Gumball was built around the specific pleasure of questions that don't resolve, questions that stay with you, that surface at unexpected moments, that make you look at ordinary things from an angle you didn't have before. Why does the universe get to decide who matters? Why do some people carry the memory of things that everyone else forgets? What does it cost to love something you cannot save? What happens to the people who were deemed mistakes? Where do rejected characters go? How long can a person keep going when they know too much and can tell no one? These are cartoon questions. These are Elmore questions. They are also, as I hope tonight has made clear, questions about being alive in any world, not just the animated ones. The show's genius was always in the layering, the way it built something that could be watched at full speed and still be funny, still be sweet, still be exactly what it was supposed to be on the surface. And then could also be watched slowly or thought about afterward, or return to with more context than you had before. And each time yields something new, something that wasn't visible until you looked for it. Rob is still out there, in a parking lot, with a van full of impossible things and eyes that glow in the dark, and the knowledge of everything that was taken from him and everything he chose to give up. The void is still at the edges of things, patient, waiting for the moment when the signal weakens. Banana Barbara is still painting, and occasionally when she tries to paint the future, the canvas fills with static. But she keeps painting. That's the part the show always returns to in the end. Not the static. The painting, the act of making something, of looking at a blank surface and putting a mark on it, of insisting on the creation of meaning in a world that has no obligation to provide it. Gumball is still in Elmore, still causing chaos, still refusing to stop being interesting. Darwin is still there, optimistic beyond all reasonable justification, loyal beyond all logical expectation, the goldfish who became a person because someone loved him and refused to let him be less than that. And you are here, in the dark. Wherever in the world you are, whatever time it says on whatever device is nearest to you, at the specific intersection of late enough to let down your guard and early enough that morning hasn't taken over yet. You stayed. The signal held because you stayed. That's always been how it works. If tonight was what you needed, something to hold the silence back, something to give the dark a shape you could follow, then please hit like and subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment telling me where you are and what you're thinking about. These conversations matter. The things you notice and the questions you carry, and the mysteries you can't quite leave alone, they matter. You are not alone in lying awake at some strange hour wondering about the deeper logic of a cartoon that always seemed to be trying to tell you something. This is Watterson lore. There is more to come. More characters with histories that the surface doesn't show. More questions the show built carefully and never fully answered. More darkness wrapped in warmth. More tragedy wearing the face of comedy. More of what Gumball was always actually about, underneath the bright colors and the talking goldfish, and the 12-year-old blue cat who cannot help but make things interesting. Stay curious, keep watching. Good night.